Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
I had seen enough. I decided to take action. My stomach twisted into a knot, but somehow, I managed to pull myself together. I walked over to the closet, pulled out a small suitcase and a larger one. I swiftly and silently packed my clothes into the larger bag, gathering all my belongings in less than a minute. I moved to the dresser, grabbed all the underwear, and stuffed everything, including undershirts, into the smaller suitcase. Next, I went to the sock drawer, managing to grab 2 large handfuls when I heard Lila yell, "Sorry to bother you." I apologized, quickly stuffing the socks into the suitcase. "I'll be gone in a few minutes, and you can go back to letting Caleb, as you so colorfully described it, have his fun." "It's not what it seems," Lila said, visibly upset. "Caleb is just a friend. He's going to leave now. We need to talk, honey." Lila, looking distraught, urged Caleb to leave. Caleb seemed to agree that exiting the room was wise, but he had no clothes on. Walking around naked in front of an angry man is usually considered poor judgment, so Caleb pulled the sheet up to his chin. I noticed my old Ruger .22 caliber revolver in my desk drawer as I finished gathering the last handful of socks. I had forgotten it was there. I had placed it in the drawer so long ago that it had slipped from my memory. Realizing I must not have worn some of my socks often enough, I grabbed the gun, turned to face my wife and her lover. I walked to the bed and sat next to Lila, holding the weapon in my hand. As I sat there, I realized that there were some quick solutions to a rather confusing situation. "Lila," I said, "it looks like you and Caleb have been having a little too much fun. Could you point out which part one misinterpreted?" "Good heavens, Eric. Have you been here this long?" Lila gasped. "I can't deny what you've seen or heard, but that doesn't mean I love you any less. It was just a silly affair, Eric. It meant nothing to me." Lila sobbed as she spoke. "It seems to me, Caleb, that you should be a little disturbed by my loving wife's latest statement," I responded. "It seems we both mean a hell of a lot to Lila. Maybe our performance in bed leaves much to be desired. Perhaps she has someone else who satisfies her better, and you and I are just substitutes, only useful when she can't find a real stud." "Eric, don't say that," Lila cried, looking at me through tear-filled eyes. "You're my only love and the best lover in the world. Please, put the gun down and let Caleb go. We can talk this through ourselves. There's no need to involve Caleb in our private issues." I looked at Lila, hearing her plea. "Well, Lila, I think there's a very good reason you and Caleb have an intimate relationship," I said coldly. "You don't need me moping around, interfering with your hot monkey sex." Lila had already started sobbing uncontrollably, and Caleb seemed to be in distress. I lowered the gun next to Lila and stood up. For a moment, I thought about using the revolver on myself, but I knew the .22 caliber would only cause damage, not death. It could blind me or result in some other painful, but non-lethal injury. I didn't need to rush my death. It was always an option, but a permanent one. I would never hurt Lila, and what was Caleb to me anyway? Lila was an attractive woman and could always find another lover. I had been giving in to my own desires for 20 years, but this situation wasn't as dire as it felt. I zipped up the second bag and stood to leave. I turned my back to the bed, ready to walk away. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a dry fire, the noise made when an empty chamber in the revolver clicks after firing. I always kept the empty chamber aligned with the firing pin for safety. I hadn't heard the gun cocking as I was packing my bag, but I knew that if the gun was cocked again, it would fire. Before I could react, I heard the distinct sound of the revolver's trigger being pulled back. Without even looking at the bed, I rushed toward the doorway. I almost made it out, but as I turned left down the stairs, something hit my forehead. The pain was somewhere between a sharp bite and a hammer strike. Instinctively, I dropped the bag from my left hand. Blood was already dripping into my left eye, and when I touched my forehead, I felt more blood and a swelling bump. My head was spinning, but fear pushed me to move faster. I managed to navigate the stairs mostly by memory, but when I reached the front door, I struggled to open it. My hand was covered in blood, and I couldn't get a good grip. I looked around in a panic and realized that the suitcase in my hand was only half closed. I grabbed a sock and used it to wipe the blood off the handle enough to turn it. I ran to my car and sped away, driving as fast as I could. Every few minutes, I pulled another sock from my bag to wipe the blood from my eyes so I could see. Getting shot in the head was far less painful than the time spent in the emergency room. The questions were endless. Everything from the name of my insurance company to who might have shot me. In the end, the small bullet was easily removed from under my skin, and a few stitches were placed. That was the easy part. The police were called because of the shooting, and I had to give them the unpleasant details. I explained that I'd been feeling bad at work and came home early, only to catch my wife, an accountant, in a compromising position. I told them how I had briefly considered ending it all, but ultimately put the gun down and tried to leave. "Mr. Jones, who shot you?" the officer asked. "Did you actually see the shooter?" "I didn't see who did it, but for you, officer, I've narrowed it down to 2 suspects," I replied sarcastically. "You'll have to take it from there." "Do you believe your wife is capable of shooting you?" he pressed. "Try finding out that your wife of 23 years has been sleeping with your accountant," I said bitterly. "Then ask her if she's capable of shooting you. You'll suddenly realize you don't know who she is or what she might do." "To answer your question, it's a real possibility," I admitted, feeling resigned. I was still in the emergency room, wondering why they were stitching up my head when the bleeding had already stopped. I noticed the doctor who had treated me was showing my chart to another man in a white coat, and I guess they were debating whether I even had a brain. The policeman stepped back, and the doctor approached me, his demeanor serious. "Mr. Jones, I'm concerned about your heart," he said. "You mentioned feeling tired and nauseous lately. I strongly urge you to stay here so we can run some tests to determine the severity of your condition. It may turn out that being in the hospital today saved your life." I groaned in frustration. "Butter my ass and call me a biscuit. I'm a lucky bastard. Lucky my accountant slept with my wife. Lucky I came home early and caught them, and lucky one of them shot me in the head. Everything's going great, Doc. Let's just get this over with while I'm on a roll." Turns out, the head wound didn't bother me much. Within a couple of days, I was being prepped for quadruple bypass surgery. Lila tried to visit me before the surgery and again while I was recovering, but I refused to see her. Both of my children were incredible. My son, Max, took a leave of absence from his job in Texas and flew down to be with me while I recovered. My daughter, Lisa, attended a local university and became my advocate while I was unconscious. It's always wise to have someone you trust looking out for you in the hospital. Even Lila's parents came and spent time with me. I was bombarded with advice from everyone. They all believed I needed to sit down with Lila and discuss the situation, what they euphemistically referred to as the situation. I held out for a few days, but eventually, I agreed. I insisted that our children and Lila's parents be present. I wanted everyone to understand my reasoning and my position. The kids brought me home from the hospital, and Lila and her parents met us in the living room. It was the first time I had seen Lila since that day, and the fact that it had been so long brought me some satisfaction. I sat on the couch, with the kids on either side of me. Lila sat across from me in a chair, and her parents sat on the love seat to my left. Lila started the conversation with what I thought were some rather foolish questions. "Eric, how could you suggest to the police that I might have been the one to shoot you? I would never hurt you, honey. You should know that after all these years." "I love you," she confessed. "Why didn't you let me visit you in the hospital? I should be the one by your side, helping you recover." Before I could answer, Lisa spoke up. "Let me answer that, Dad," she said. "Mom, you betrayed Dad in the marital bed. He never thought you were capable of that. When he realized what you could do, he realized he had no idea what you were capable of. That's when he told the police what he did. You would have caused him even more stress if you'd been allowed to see him before or after the surgery. He needs love and understanding, not a cheating wife." I was surprised by how well Lisa understood my train of thought. Why didn't Lila understand this already, without having to ask such ridiculous questions? Lila didn't take kindly to Lisa's blunt words. "I'm still your mother, and I don't appreciate you speaking to me like that," she protested. "You should have thought about that before you committed yourself to this man," Lila's mother shot back. "You haven't earned your daughter's respect. You did a terrible thing, so don't act like you're above a good scolding." Lila was taken aback when her mother lashed out at her with such force. She had probably expected her parents to be supportive or, at the very least, neutral. "Okay, I made a terrible mistake. It only happened once, and Eric caught me. I'm ashamed and embarrassed by what I did. But that doesn't mean I don't love Eric with all my heart," Lila pleaded. "I made a terrible error in judgment, and I want to atone for it." "Mom, is this family some kind of revival religion where you stand up and admit your sins and get forgiveness?" Max asked. "Maybe Dad could baptize you and wash away your sins, and your memories too. Is that really how you think it's supposed to work?" Lila asked, but everyone seemed to pounce on her. I have to admit, I enjoyed it more than I should have. Her parents and kids were really giving it to her. I spent most of my time thinking about how I could get revenge. What better way to do that than by attacking her closest blood relatives? "No, Max," Lila exclaimed, her voice rising. I don't have an answer except that I know your father is a wonderful, gentle, loving husband and father. I just hope that my absolute remorse and my love for him means something. I really need him, and I think he needs me. Well, honey, I finally spoke, and the sarcasm was thick in my voice. Do you belong to Caleb now? I wouldn't want you to be an Indian giver or anything like that. Whoever is the better man takes the spoils of victory. I lied. It was just a joke. Really, meant to cut through the tension. No one owns me or my body parts, except you, darling, Lila responded. I'm willing to give you everything I have, everything I am. If you'll forgive me, why should I believe you didn't mean what you said to Caleb? I shot back. I think you were sincere, but you called me a lying, cheating Eric. Now you want things to be different? You're trying to make me tell the truth. You're contradicting yourself. Am I a liar? Or am I telling the truth? Lila reasoned. I'd bet on a liar. You don't have a very strong argument, I replied coldly. You tell me you lied to men, and Caleb was just another victim. How many men have you been with? Do you have a list? Are they all homicidal maniacs? Is there anyone else waiting to put a bullet in my forehead? Between you and that damn quack doctor, there's not much left of my heart. There's barely anything worth hitting. Eric, I swear Caleb was the one, Lila said, her voice desperate. And to be honest, you caught us the second time we were together. I had no idea he was such a tightwad. He literally wet the bed when you pulled the gun out of the drawer. When you put it on the floor, he grabbed it as fast as he could. Bringing a loaded gun to a man who's scared to death is not the smartest thing you could have done. Well, pardon me for not having a manual on what to do when you catch your wife having fun with another man in your bed. I shot back. I had no idea what to do. Why hadn't we considered this possibility earlier? You should have known you were a cheater. What were you planning when I caught you? I demanded, my voice sharp. Honestly, I never thought it would happen. But if there's ever a next time, please just shoot me, Lila replied, her voice hollow. It would be so much better than going through this nightmare. My own parents and children have no respect for me, and the only man I love unconditionally despises me. I almost got you killed. A bullet to the head would have been kinder. Though I deserve to suffer, I know it. For a moment, there was silence. I don't think any of us realized the toll it was taking on Lila. Her life had turned into a living hell, and the thought of that brought me a strange sense of satisfaction. I don't think there's much else to discuss. I finally broke the silence. I'm divorcing you, Lila. I don't have a choice. I have terms and conditions. Get a good lawyer, because I'm going to make sure you're held accountable. I have to do this to maintain some self-respect. My lawyer will be in touch. The kids have already found some apartments for me to look at, and our first meeting is in a few minutes. You broke my heart, Lila, and even the doctors couldn't fix it. Goodbye. Lila just bowed her head, sobbing. Her parents walked me and the kids to the door without a word. It was frustrating, but at the same time, it felt oddly fitting. Funny how things turn out. If I hadn't been shot in the head and sent to the hospital, I probably would have died within a couple of weeks, if not less. That's what the doctors told me. In a twisted way, I realized that Lila's affair had probably saved my life, even if it was the worst thing that had ever happened to me. Thankfully, I had a good job and excellent insurance. Lila started working part-time at a department store after the kids left home, but her income was minimal. My attorney made an offer to Lila's legal advisor for an unfair, totally unacceptable settlement. We had to start somewhere, and we could always negotiate later. I was stunned when my lawyer told me that Lila had agreed to the settlement, despite her lawyer's advice. We still had a mortgage on the house, which Lila would never be able to afford on her own. I was getting the lion's share of the savings and equity, and she wouldn't receive any alimony. It seemed impossible for Lila to survive on her own. I was certain of it. Then, like something out of a movie, another stroke of luck came my way. I bought a lottery ticket, and it turned out to be worth several $1,000,000. At first, I was excited, but quickly became fearful that Lila might get her hands on some of it. I kept the ticket a secret, carrying it around in my wallet, often pulling it out when I was alone to hold it, obsessing over what it could buy me. As time passed, the loneliness began to grow, and the pleasure I once got from holding the winning ticket started to fade. I realized that I had already earned all the money I needed, especially now that I was about to be a bachelor. So why was I feeling more miserable, even with the newfound wealth? Money was no longer the issue. I took a week off and went fishing on the Delaware River, spending most of my time on the water, fishing and thinking. After dark, I would drink beer and keep thinking. By the end of the week, I had formulated a plan. Lila's parents agreed to meet me at my apartment on Sunday night. They were sworn to secrecy, not to tell anyone that I had invited them over. Mark, I have a favor to ask you, I began, addressing my father-in-law. If you can't honor my request, could you at least keep what I'm about to tell you a closely guarded secret? I think I can agree to that, Eric, unless it's something that must be disclosed to save a life or something like that, Mark replied. I bought a lottery ticket a couple of months ago. It's worth a little over $4 million if I take the annuity, I said. That's great for you, Eric. Congratulations. What do you need from us? Are you asking us not to tell Lila? Mark asked, his tone suddenly dejected. Yes, Mark. She must never find out that I bought the ticket, I insisted. Eric, you're putting us in a difficult position. You see that, don't you? Nina, my mother-in-law, asked. Not really, Nina, I replied. I want you to tell Lila that you bought the ticket. I want you to divide it between Lila and the children, each getting a third. But please, don't tell anyone that I bought the ticket. No one will question you giving it to your daughter and grandchildren. It's perfectly legal, and it will help the children, plus save Lila's life. Nina had tears running down her cheeks, and Mark cleared his throat and stared out the window. It didn't take much to realize that my offer had deeply touched them. I felt better than I had in ages, especially since the day I came home early and found Lila in bed with someone else. This felt like the first step toward emotional healing. Eric, we'll gladly go along with your plan, Mark said with a smirk. You know, Lila's been staying in more and working longer hours just to keep up with the mortgage. She really knows she messed up, and it's not about the money. Mark wasn't one to speak much. He had spent 25 years as a firefighter in New York City, and he got straight to the point. His daughter's actions hurt him and Nina almost as much as they hurt me. A week later, I received the most bizarre news from my attorney. Lila, my soon-to-be ex-wife, had contacted her lawyer, telling him that she had extra income to declare, and that I was entitled to half of it. What kind of lawyer did she have? I instructed my lawyer to inform her attorney that I would not accept any share, and that she could keep everything. When the divorce hearing came, we were at an impasse over the distribution of the lottery money. Both sides refused to compromise. My lawyer even suggested he might drop my case because it was damaging his reputation as a tough negotiator. He smiled when he said it. The judge, however, was shocked by the ongoing dispute. He said, I've never seen such a fight over money in a divorce. It makes me question whether a divorce is necessary. Perhaps counseling or an open dialogue between the parties would help resolve this. He told our attorneys to keep working on a settlement and to reconsider in a month. He also encouraged Lila and me to have a conversation as soon as possible. I left the courtroom feeling completely confused. Lila's parents had attended the hearing, and Mark approached me in the parking lot. Eric, I'm asking you as a favor to stop by the house right now. We'll have a sandwich, each have a beer, and try to work things out. You two are the most stubborn people I've ever seen, he said before leaving without waiting for my reply. When I rang the bell at their house, Lila opened the door. She looked pale but otherwise fine. She barely made eye contact as she led me into the kitchen, where her parents had laid out cold cuts and everything needed for sandwiches that could last a week. Mark handed me a cold beer. Eric, I want to speak first, Lila began. My parents bought the winning lottery ticket and gave it to me and the kids to split. You already know you're entitled to half of my share. Since we were still married when we cashed it in, she paused for a moment. I have a selfish reason for wanting you to get your half. It will help me forgive myself for the terrible mistake I made toward you. I know you can't forgive me, but I can't forgive myself either. And it really, really hurts, Lila said, her voice breaking. It's not about the money, Eric. It's about finally doing something right and fair to you. You deserve better than I gave you. Please accept the money, and I'll agree to the divorce. You'll be free of me. Mark and Nina watched me closely, waiting for my response. I thought about it for a long time. I don't think money should be tied to forgiveness, Lila. What you did was terrible, but it's over now. If you'll just accept the money and agree to the terms of the divorce, I'll get closure. If it helps, I forgive you. It took some time and more than one beer, but I do forgive you. I wish it had never happened, but we can't change the past. I loved you, Lila. I still do, but I can't trust you, so I can't stay married to you. I don't want you to lose your home or suffer because of me. I'm not proud of it, but the rest of the agreement is in my favor, so just accept the money your parents gave you. I won't do that, Eric, Lila said, her voice rising with drama. I'll fight this all the way to the Supreme Court if I have to. For heaven's sake, Mark shouted, shocking everyone. This is so pathetic. I can't stand it. Lila screwed up and broke your heart. You can't stay married to a cheater, and that's exactly what she is. Lila needs some damn absolution before she'll agree to the divorce. Does that make sense? Mark continued as Lila, and I silently nodded. Here's my suggestion. Take it for what it's worth. Lila, give the poor guy a divorce and keep his dignity. He deserves that. After the divorce, go on with your lives, separate for good, and stop this toxic mess. Lila, you've had your chance, but you need to face what you've done. Lila wiped her eyes, her expression a mix of regret and determination. I can't fix everything, Eric, but I'm ready to let you go and take responsibility for my actions. You deserve better than this. Mark gave a heavy sigh but nodded. That's the right choice, Lila. You messed up, but it's time to move forward. This marriage can't survive, but that doesn't mean you both have to be stuck in this misery. With a resigned but calm expression, I turned to Lila. I still care about you, but we can't go back. We're done. The divorce proceedings moved quickly after that. Lila and I agreed on terms without further conflict, settling the financial aspects fairly and without drama. The lottery money, initially a point of tension, was resolved with Lila keeping her share and ensuring the kids were provided for. After the divorce was finalized, we each moved on. Lila took some time to focus on herself, working through her mistakes and starting fresh, while I found peace in knowing that I had chosen to let go of the past. We didn't become enemies, but we no longer needed to be in each other's lives in the same way. Life continued, and in time, both of us healed. I was able to focus on my future without the weight of betrayal hanging over me, while Lila worked hard to rebuild her life. Neither of us found it easy, but we both found the freedom we needed to move forward, separately but with the hope that things would get better in the end. The ballistics report had finally come back, and it was the final piece of the puzzle. The bullets recovered from Eric's body had been traced back to the specific gun that had been found in Caleb's possession, an old model, registered under his name. It didn't take long for the detectives to connect the dots. The arrest of Caleb came after a breakthrough in the investigation, one that left him cornered and without an escape. It was late afternoon when the detectives arrived at Caleb's house. He had been under surveillance for a while, but there had been no concrete evidence until now. With the match between the bullets and the gun, everything had fallen into place. Caleb answered the door himself, his face a mask of confusion as he saw the two detectives standing in front of him. He tried to hide the nervous twitch in his eye, but it was hard to conceal his unease. Officer Mitchell, a seasoned detective who had been working the case from the start, stepped forward. Caleb Madsen, we need to talk, Mitchell said, his tone even but firm. Caleb's pulse quickened, but he tried to remain calm. What's this about? He asked, attempting to sound confident. We have evidence linking you to the shooting of Eric Lambert. Your gun was found with the same ballistics that injured him, Mitchell said, his words slow and deliberate. Caleb's mind raced. He opened his mouth to protest, but the words stuck in his throat. How had they found the gun? He had been careful, hadn't he? He thought he'd gotten away with it, that no one would connect him to the crime. But here it was, his mistake, his arrogance. And now it was all unraveling. You're under arrest for the shooting of Eric Jones, Mitchell continued, his partner stepping forward to cuff Caleb's hands behind his back. Caleb's heart pounded in his chest as the reality of the situation hit him. He was being arrested. The consequences of his actions were finally catching up to him. Caleb didn't fight back. He couldn't. The evidence was too strong, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized there was no way out. The smug confidence he had once held onto evaporated in an instant. He was no longer in control. As the officers led him out to the patrol car, Caleb's mind wandered back to the events that had led him here. He had pulled the trigger, fired the shots, thinking it would be the perfect way to take Eric out of the picture. He hadn't intended to kill him, but injuring him, well, that was another story. But it didn't matter. The law didn't care about his intentions. It only cared about the evidence, and the gun had tied him directly to the crime. The ride to the station was silent, except for the occasional hum of the car's engine and the sound of Caleb's breathing. He felt a strange, almost suffocating weight pressing down on him. The walls were closing in. As they arrived at the station, Caleb was taken through the back in trance, away from the prying eyes of the press and public. Inside, he was booked and processed, the reality of his situation settling in deeper with each passing moment. He wasn't the one in control anymore. He wasn't the one calling the shots. He was the one in cuffs, the one facing charges. Caleb sat in the dimly lit jail cell, his back against the cold concrete wall. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed above him, casting an unflattering glow on his sharp features. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor as a guard passed by, his keys clinking loudly. Caleb barely looked up. He was too lost in his own thoughts. The world had been turned upside down for him in the span of a few weeks. In court, His smug smile had faltered as the evidence was laid bare before him. The star witness was none other than Lila herself. She stated how Caleb had once discussed killing Eric, but it was never a serious discussion. It was proven that Lila had no direct connection with the shooting, and Caleb acted on his own without her knowledge. The prosecutions also highlighted that it was due to Lila's support that the cops could have Caleb as a man of interest, and then did the investigation. Lila was responsible for the arrest of Caleb. The once confident Caleb now stood in a prison cell, facing the consequences of his actions. But now, he was just another number in the system. His first few days in jail had been a mix of confusion and disbelief. But now that reality had sunk in, he had become the target of everyone's frustration. Caleb's smugness didn't help matters. It only fueled the anger of the other prisoners, who saw him as a symbol of the system they despised. It didn't take long for the beatings to start. The first time, it was a group of men in the shower. Caleb had been standing there, his arrogance still intact, when one of them threw a punch. It connected with his ribs, and before he could react, another blow landed on his face. They surrounded him, their fists raining down as he tried to protect himself, but it was no use. They were relentless, the fury of 1,000 frustrations directed at him in those few moments. The second time, it was in the yard. Caleb tried to keep his head down, his eyes darting nervously around, but he couldn't escape the looks of contempt. One inmate, a massive man with tattoos covering every inch of his skin, approached him slowly. Caleb tried to offer him a smile, but the man grabbed him by the collar and slammed him into the brick wall. The pain shot through Caleb's body as his vision blurred, and he could taste the copper of blood in his mouth. After that, it became a daily ritual. Caleb no longer walked with the same confident swagger he once had. His face was swollen, bruised, and unrecognizable. His eyes had lost the gleam they once had, now dull and resigned. He spent his days trying to keep a low profile, but even that couldn't protect him. The jail had become his personal hell, and every moment felt like an eternity. In his solitude, he couldn't escape the image of Eric, lying in his blood, staining the floor. Caleb had been the one to pull the trigger, but now it felt like the world was pulling the trigger on him, and he realized, far too late, that some actions were impossible to undo. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Cheating Tales Lab. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. Marshall Huffman's polished Oxford shoes clicked against the marble floors of Pinnacle Acquisition's executive floor. At 48, he cut an imposing figure, 6'2", broad-shouldered, with steel gray eyes that could dissect a balance sheet as easily as they could read a room. His tailored charcoal suit spoke of success, but it was his presence that commanded respect. "Morning, Mr. Huffman," his assistant Sarah called out as he passed her desk. "The Q3 merger projections are on your desk, and Mr. Lancaster wants to see you at 11. Marshall nodded, his mind already processing the day ahead. "Thanks, Sarah. Push the Transglobal meeting to 2. I want to review those projections first." Inside his corner office, Marshall settled into his leather chair, taking in the Manhattan skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. 23 years at Pinnacle had earned him this view, along with the CFO position that made him Robert Lancaster's right hand. The thought of his CEO brought a slight frown to his otherwise composed features. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife, Isabella. "Charity committee meeting with Robert today. Don't wait up for dinner." Marshall's thumb hovered over the message. These meetings had become more frequent lately. He dismissed the thought. Isabella had been managing their social calendar for 15 years, and her networking had only helped their family's position. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Alexandra, his eldest daughter, strode in with the confidence of someone who already saw herself in his chair. At 22, fresh from Harvard Business School, she carried herself with the polished grace of old money Marshall had worked decades to provide. "Dad," she said, perching on the edge of his desk rather than taking a seat. "Robert mentioned there might be an opening in strategic planning. I thought I'd stop by and remind you that my Harvard network could be valuable there." Marshall studied his daughter's face. She had Isabella's features, the same honey blonde hair and green eyes. But lately, he'd noticed something else in her expression, something calculated. "Alexandra, we've discussed this. Entry-level position. Please, she cut him off with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. We both know I'm not entry-level material. Robert agrees with me. The casual use of his CEO's first name didn't escape Marshall's notice. He maintained his neutral expression, years of high-stakes negotiations serving him well. We'll discuss this at home, he said firmly. I have the trans-global merger to focus on. Alexandra's smile tightened. Of course, Dad. Mother's hosting dinner next week with the Lancaster family. Maybe we can discuss it then. After she left, Marshall pulled up the trans-global merger documents. The deal would be his largest yet, a $4.2 billion acquisition that would cement Pinnacle's position in the market. His phone buzzed again with a group text from his twins, Thomas and Timothy. Dad, need to discuss summer internship. Robert mentioned positions opening up. Marshall's jaw tightened. When had his CEO become so involved with his children's careers? The twins were only 19, sophomores at Yale, yet they spoke of Robert with a familiarity that seemed presumptuous for their age. A video call notification popped up on his screen, Victoria, his 17-year-old daughter, from her boarding school. Dad. Her face filled the screen, the prestigious Westfield Academy's limestone buildings visible behind her. The school's endowment committee is reviewing donations. Mr. Lancaster said you'd handle it? Victoria, why are you talking to Robert about school donations? She rolled her eyes in a way that reminded him too much of Isabella. Mom said to ask him first. You're always so busy with work stuff. I am busy, Marshall replied, ensuring your tuition is paid and your trust fund grows. Speaking of which, how's your brother? Andrew's fine. He's probably in lacrosse practice. Oh, Mother said to remind you about next Thursday's dinner. After ending the call, Marshall leaned back in his chair, his mind working with the precision that had made him one of Wall Street's most respected CFOs. Something felt off, like when the numbers in a merger proposal didn't quite add up. The rest of his day passed in a blur of meetings and conference calls. The trans-global merger consumed most of his attention. The deal had to be perfect. By evening, most of Pinnacle's employees had left, leaving the office floors in silence. Sarah stopped by his office one last time. Mr. Huffman, will you be needing anything else?
Mr. Lancaster and Mrs. Huffman left about an hour ago. Another charity meeting, I believe.
Marshall noted the slight hesitation in Sarah's voice. No, thank you, Sarah. Have a good evening. He worked for another hour, reviewing performance reports and bonus structures. His own bonuses had been exceptionally generous over the years, Robert's way of recognizing his contribution to Pinnacle's growth. Those bonuses had funded their mansion in Greenwich, the children's education, Isabella's social endeavors. At 9:30, Marshall decided to head home early. The house would likely be empty. Isabella's charity meetings often ran late, but he had financial models to review in his home office. The drive to Greenwich was quiet, his Mercedes cutting through the cool autumn night. Their estate's gates opened automatically, security cameras tracking his car's progress up the winding driveway. The house stood impressively against the dark sky. 6 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, a testament to his success. He was about to enter through the front door when he noticed lights in the family room. Voices drifted through the partially open French doors. Isabella's laugh, the one she reserved for social occasions, made him pause. Your real father is Robert Lancaster. Isabella's voice carried clearly through the gap. Marshall's hand froze on the door handle. Inside, he could see his family gathered in the warm light of their family room. Isabella stood by the fireplace, looking elegant in an expensive dress he didn't recognize. Their children sat around her, expressions ranging from amusement to conspiracy. He's been funding everything through your dad's bonuses, Isabella continued, swirling wine in a crystal glass. Once the trans-global merger closes next month, we'll take control of everything. Marshall's too focused on spreadsheets to notice he's just been our front man. The words hit Marshall like physical blows, but decades of corporate negotiations had taught him to control his reactions. He remained perfectly still, gathering intelligence like he would in a hostile takeover. Alexandra's laugh cut through the room. Dad's such a fool. He actually thinks he earned those bonuses. Robert showed me the real books. Every penny was planned. Your father, Isabella emphasized the word with mock sweetness, has been useful. His financial expertise made everything look legitimate. The board trusts him completely. But why keep him around so long? Thomas or Timothy asked. Marshall couldn't see which twin had spoken. Because, darling, Isabella's voice dripped with condescension. Marshall's reputation is impeccable. No one questions his financial decisions. Robert needed that credibility. And the merger? Victoria's voice now, eager to be part of the adult conversation. Will be our masterpiece. Robert Lancaster's voice emerged from a corner of the room Marshall couldn't see. Once it closes, the transfer of assets will be untraceable. Marshall's signature on everything makes it perfectly legal. What about the other shareholders? Andrew asked, surprising Marshall with his grasp of corporate matters. Robert's laugh was cold. They'll be too busy dealing with the merger's fallout to notice where the money went. By the time anyone realizes what happened, we'll be settled somewhere without extradition treaties. And Marshall? Isabella asked, an edge to her voice that Marshall had never heard before. We'll take the fall, Robert replied casually. His signatures are on everything. The board will assume he orchestrated the whole thing. Quite poetic, really. The trusted CFO betraying everyone. Alexandra's Harvard connections will help smooth the transition, Isabella added proudly. No one will question her taking over his position afterward. We've planned everything perfectly. Marshall watched his oldest daughter beam at the praise. The Harvard Alumni Association already thinks I'm following in Dad's footsteps. They have no idea whose footsteps I'm really following. The twins high-fived each other. Yale's business school won't know what hit them, one of them said. Robert's donations guaranteed our spots. When do we tell him? Victoria asked, sounding younger than her 17 years. Tell him? Isabella laughed. Oh, darling, Marshall won't need to be told anything. Once the merger closes, everything will happen so fast he won't know what hit him. Robert has arranged for certain irregularities to be discovered. Marshall's reputation will be destroyed so thoroughly, no one will believe a word he says. The timing has to be perfect, Robert added. The transglobal merger is complex enough that any financial discrepancies will be buried in the details. Marshall's own thoroughness works against him. He's documented everything so meticulously that his signature on the fraudulent documents will be unquestionable. Marshall had heard enough. With the same silent precision he used in corporate takeovers, he withdrew from the door. His mind was already cataloging information, forming strategies, identifying weaknesses in their plan. He made his way to his home office, careful not to make a sound. The room was his sanctuary, a place where he had structured countless deals, orchestrated mergers that had made Pinnacle a powerhouse. Now it would serve a different purpose. Logging into his secure terminal, Marshall began pulling up records. Years of transaction histories, bonus payments, offshore transfers, everything he had overseen as CFO. But now he looked at them with new eyes, seeing the pattern he had missed. Each major merger had corresponded with substantial bonuses to his accounts. Those bonuses had then been quietly transferred to shell companies, companies he now recognized as being controlled by Isabella. Robert had used Marshall's legitimate merger work as cover for massive fraud, while secretly transferring company assets through Marshall's bonuses into accounts his wife controlled. The scheme was brilliant in its simplicity. Marshall's reputation for financial integrity had made him the perfect unwitting accomplice. Every successful deal he closed for Pinnacle had been used to hide their fraudulent transfers. His own legitimate earnings had masked the illegal flow of funds. More disturbing were the documents he found regarding Alexandra. His daughter's Harvard admission, her internships, her entire career path, all had been orchestrated by Robert and Isabella. They had been grooming her to take over Marshall's position after the merger, using her Harvard connections to legitimize the transition. The transglobal merger would be their masterstroke. Marshall could see it clearly now. The complex transaction would provide cover for the largest asset transfer yet. By the time anyone unraveled the details, Robert and Isabella would be gone, along with billions in company assets. Marshall would be left to face federal investigators, his signature on countless fraudulent documents. Hours passed as Marshall dug deeper, documenting everything. His financial expertise, the very skill Robert and Isabella had exploited, now served to uncover their decade-long conspiracy. Every transaction, every transfer, every false document, Marshall captured it all. Dawn was breaking when he finally leaned back in his chair. In the growing light, he could hear movement in the house. His family starting their day, unaware that their carefully constructed plan was about to implode. Marshall allowed himself a small, cold smile. They had underestimated him badly. They saw what they wanted to see. The predictable CFO, too focused on spreadsheets to notice their betrayal. They forgot that those same spreadsheets had helped him orchestrate some of the most complex corporate takeovers in recent history. A knock at his office door. "Dad," Alexandra's voice. "You're home early. Mother said you had a late meeting." "Just reviewing some merger documents," Marshall replied evenly. "How's the Harvard Alumni Association these days?" "Oh, networking, making connections." "Robert think." "I'm sure he does," Marshall cut her off smoothly. "Tell your mother I'll be working from home today. The trans-global merger needs my full attention." After Alexandra left, Marshall began composing emails. The board would need to be informed. Evidence would need to be distributed. Assets would need to be secured. But first, he had some calls to make to certain foreign banks. Let Robert and Isabella think they had orchestrated the perfect plan. Marshall hadn't become Pinnacle's CFO by being predictable. By the time they realized their mistake, it would be far too late. The morning sun cast long shadows across his desk as Marshall began implementing his counterattack. In the house beyond his office, his family went about their morning routines, confident in their secrets. Marshall allowed himself another small smile. They had taught him an invaluable lesson about family loyalty. He intended to show them exactly how well he had learned it. Marshall's fingers moved across his keyboard with surgical precision. Dawn's first light crept through his home office windows, but he hadn't slept. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford, not when every minute counted. His computer screens displayed a complex web of financial transactions. 10 years of performance bonuses stretched across multiple spreadsheets, each one a perfectly orchestrated lie. Robert Lancaster's signature appeared consistently alongside his own, a detail that brought a cold smile to Marshall's face. "Amateur," he muttered, documenting another fraudulent transfer. Robert had been clever, but he'd made a crucial mistake. He'd assumed Marshall's financial expertise was limited to legitimate transactions. Sarah, his assistant, answered on the first ring despite the early hour. "Mr. Huffman?" "Sarah, I need complete access to all merger documents from the past decade. Every signature, every amendment, every appendix." "And Sarah?" "Use the secure server. No one else needs to know." "Of course, Mr. Huffman. Should I inform Mr. Lancaster?" "No need. He'll find out soon enough." Marshall disconnected the call and pulled up the trans-global merger documents. The deal's complexity had been deliberate. Robert and Isabella had planned to use it as cover for their final heist. But complexity cut both ways. A notification popped up, access granted to the secure server. Marshall's hands flew across the keyboard, his mind dissecting years of financial manipulation. Robert's pattern emerged clearly now. Artificially inflated company valuations, funds funneled through Marshall's bonuses, assets quietly transferred to shell companies owned by Isabella. "Sloppy," Marshall commented, noting how Robert had used the same offshore banks repeatedly. "Predictable." He accessed Pinnacle's main financial system using his CFO credentials. Robert had never understood the full extent of Marshall's system access, another fatal mistake. Within hours, Marshall had traced every fraudulent transaction, documented every illegal transfer, mapped every shell company connection. His phone buzzed. "Isabella, darling, are you coming to breakfast? The children are asking for you." Marshall's voice remained perfectly pleasant. "Still working on the trans-global merger." "Don't wait for me," Robert called. "He wants to discuss some last-minute details." "I'm sure he does." After hanging up, Marshall accessed a secure line to contact James Chen, his personal attorney, one whose existence neither Robert nor Isabella knew about. "James, initiate Protocol 7. "Yes, all of it." "And James? Make it ironclad." The next hours passed in a blur of precise financial maneuvers. Marshall methodically transferred all legitimate company assets into secure holding companies, his actions masked by the merger's normal activities. Robert's planned poison pills were identified and neutralized one by one. A knock at his office door. "Dad." Alexandra's voice. "Mother says you've been in here all night. The merger requires attention, Alexandra. Or perhaps Robert hasn't explained that part to you." A pause. "I don't know what you mean." "Of course not. Tell your mother I'll be busy all day. The transglobal deal needs my personal touch." After Alexandra's footsteps faded, Marshall accessed another secure line. "Mr. Zhao?" "Yes, about those offshore accounts. Execute option B. All of them." By mid-morning, Marshall had compiled an exhaustive record of Robert and Isabella's decade-long conspiracy. Every fraudulent transaction, every manipulated valuation, every illicit transfer, all documented with meticulous precision. His findings revealed the true scope of Robert's ambition. The transglobal merger wasn't just another deal. It was meant to be a corporate extinction event. Sarah's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Huffman, Mr. Lancaster is asking about the merger documents. Tell him they'll be ready by end of day." "And Sarah? Thank you for your loyalty over the years." Marshall turned to the wall safe hidden behind an original Rothko, a gift from Robert, ironically. Inside lay USB drives containing evidence of tax fraud, embezzlement, and securities violations. Each drive was perfectly organized, ready for distribution to board members. His phone buzzed again. Thomas and Timothy in a group chat. "Dad, Robert mentioned board meeting tomorrow. Still good for Yale summer internships?"
Can't.
Marshall's reply was brief. "Focus on your studies. Tomorrow will be educational." A separate message from Victoria. "Dad, Mother says you're being difficult about the merger." Robert think. He cut off the message. His youngest children, Victoria and Andrew, would learn soon enough about their mother's true nature. By afternoon, Marshall had discovered something even more damning. Robert hadn't just been documenting the fraud. He'd been keeping detailed records of Isabella's involvement, obviously planning to use it as leverage. The records included Isabella's parallel schemes at their children's private schools, where she'd been embezzling from charity foundations she managed. Protecting himself while betraying her, Marshall noted. How appropriate. He accessed another secure line. "Agent Phillips?" "Yes, it's time. Everything will be on your desk by morning." "And the offshore accounts?" "Yes, all of them. You'll find Mrs. Huffman's fingerprints particularly interesting." The sun was setting when Marshall finished his final preparations. His counterattack was orchestrated with the same precision he'd applied to his most successful mergers. Every detail was accounted for, every contingency planned for. Sarah's voice came through one last time. "Mr. Huffman? The board members are confirmed for tomorrow's emergency meeting." "Thank you, Sarah. One last thing. Please ensure those USB drives are placed at their seats before the meeting." Marshall stood at his office window, watching the estate's security cameras on his tablet. Isabella's car was pulling up. Another charity meeting with Robert had run late. His children's vehicles were all accounted for, everyone home for what they thought would be a normal family dinner. His phone buzzed with a message from Robert. "Marshall, need to discuss some concerning irregularities in the merger documents. Urgent meeting tomorrow, 8 a.m. Marshall allowed himself a small smile as he typed his reply. "Of course, Robert. I've found some irregularities myself. Tomorrow will be illuminating." He watched through the security feed as Isabella entered the house, her designer handbag, a gift from Robert, swinging carelessly. Alexandra's voice drifted up from downstairs, discussing Harvard Alumni Association contacts. The twins were arguing about Yale's business school requirements, while Victoria and Andrew debated which summer house they'd use after the merger. Marshall turned back to his computers, implementing the final phases of his plan. By morning, Robert and Isabella's carefully constructed world would collapse. The evidence was irrefutable, the documentation perfect, the trap inescapable. His phone buzzed one last time. Isabella again. "Darling, aren't you joining us for dinner?" The children want to discuss their future plans. Marshall's reply was succinct. "Still working. The future requires careful planning." He turned back to his work, his movements precise and purposeful. They had taught him valuable lessons about family, loyalty, and betrayal. Tomorrow, he would demonstrate exactly how well he had learned them. The night deepened as Marshall executed the final stages of his counterattack. Each move was calculated, each action deliberate. Robert and Isabella had spent a decade building their fraudulent empire. Marshall would dismantle it in a single day. Sarah's final message of the night appeared. "Everything is in place, Mr. Huffman. The board members will receive their notifications at dawn." "Thank you, Sarah. Tomorrow will be a day of revelations." In the house below, his family continued their evening, unaware that their carefully constructed facade was about to shatter. Marshall allowed himself another small, cold smile. They had mistaken his precision for predictability, his attention to detail for blindness, his loyalty for weakness. Tomorrow, they would understand their error. The night grew later, but Marshall's focus never wavered. His screens displayed the culmination of his work, a comprehensive map of Robert and Isabella's criminal enterprise, ready to be exposed to the world. Every transaction traced, every fraud documented, every betrayal catalogued. His phone's final notification of the night was from Robert Lancaster's private number. "Marshall, Isabella mentioned you've been working late. Any concerns about tomorrow's board meeting?" Marshall's response was carefully measured. "No concerns, Robert. Just ensuring everything is properly documented. See you at 8. He turned back to his screens, implementing the last phases of his plan. They had spent years underestimating him, seeing only what they wanted to see. Tomorrow, they would learn the cost of that mistake. In the quiet of his office, Marshall continued his work, his movements precise, his purpose clear. They had taught him that family loyalty was a weapon. He intended to show them exactly how sharp that weapon could be. Dawn approached, bringing with it the promise of revelation. Marshall's counterattack was ready, every detail perfect, every trap set. Robert and Isabella had orchestrated what they thought was the perfect plan. Tomorrow, they would learn otherwise. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Marshall completed his final preparations. The documentation was perfect, the evidence irrefutable, the trap inescapable. In a few hours, the board would convene, and the carefully constructed illusion of the past decade would shatter. His phone lit up with one last message from Isabella. "Darling, you've been in there all night. The children are worried." Marshall's reply was brief. "The future requires sacrifice. Sleep well, Isabella." He turned back to his screens, reviewing his work one final time. They had taught him valuable lessons about family, loyalty, and betrayal. Tomorrow, he would demonstrate exactly how well he had learned them. The night deepened into its final hours as Marshall executed the last stages of his counterattack. Each move was calculated, each action deliberate. Robert and Isabella had spent years building their fraudulent empire. Marshall would dismantle it in a single morning. Sarah's final message appeared. "All preparations are complete, Mr. Huffman. The board members will receive their notifications at dawn." "Thank you, Sarah. Tomorrow will be a day of reckoning." In the house below, his family slept peacefully, unaware that their carefully constructed world was about to collapse. Marshall allowed himself one last, cold smile. They had mistaken his precision for predictability, his attention to detail for blindness, his loyalty for weakness. Tomorrow, they would understand their error. The night grew later, but Marshall's focus never wavered. His screens displayed the culmination of his work, a comprehensive map of Robert and Isabella's criminal enterprise, ready to be exposed to the light of day. Every transaction traced, every fraud documented, every betrayal catalogued. As dawn approached, Marshall sat back in his chair, surveying his work. The trap was set, the evidence compiled, the counterattack ready. They had spent years underestimating him, seeing only what they wanted to see. Tomorrow, they would learn the cost of that mistake. Robert Lancaster strode through Pinnacle's executive terminal, his private jet waiting on the tarmac. Behind him, Bloomberg terminals flashed red as news of the fraud allegations decimated Pinnacle's stock price. The trans-global merger was imploding spectacularly, exactly as Marshall had planned. Mr. Lancaster, his pilot, James Wilson, greeted him at the terminal. "Weather looks clear to the Caymans." Robert barely acknowledged him, too busy barking orders into his phone. "Move everything. I don't care about the fees. Empty all the accounts now." "Problems, sir?" Wilson asked, taking Robert's briefcase. "Just fly the damn plane, Wilson. What Robert didn't know was that Wilson had been Marshall's plant for years, placed specifically for this moment. As they took off, Wilson entered coordinates not for the Caymans, but for a private airstrip where FBI agents waited. Meanwhile, at the Greenwich estate, Isabella frantically dialed numbers on her phone. "What do you mean the accounts are empty?" she screamed at her Swiss banker. "Check again. Madam Huffman, the accounts were cleared 3 days ago." Mr. Lancaster's orders. Isabella's perfectly manicured hand trembled as she opened her laptop, accessing the offshore accounts one by one. Each login revealed the same truth. Robert had betrayed her. Her phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "Sorry, darling. Business is business." On her screen, a new email appeared from Marshall's attorney. The subject line, Prenuptial Agreement, Section 7.4. In downtown Manhattan, Alexandra burst into tears as the Harvard Alumni Association rescinded her job offer. Due to emerging allegations of academic fraud, the twins weren't faring better. Yale's Dean of Admissions had some pointed questions about their acceptance and certain donations made by Robert Lancaster. Victoria and Andrew huddled in their respective boarding school dormitories, watching their family's disgrace unfold on national news. Marshall observed it all from a secure location, his laptop displaying multiple feeds. Robert's plane changing course, Isabella's failed bank logins, the federal agents swarming their estate. "Mr. Huffman," Agent Phillips reported via secure line. "Mr. Lancaster's plane is being diverted now. Would you like to watch the arrest?" "No need," Marshall replied. "Send me the paperwork when it's done." 3 months later, Marshall sat in his new office, the CEO's suite at Pinnacle Acquisitions. The board's vote had been unanimous. After all, he had saved the company from complete destruction. Robert Lancaster's federal indictment made for interesting reading. Securities fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy. But it was Isabella's charges that drew Marshall's attention. Her charity foundation schemes had been more extensive than anyone suspected. "Mr. Huffman," his new assistant announced, "the FBI has more questions about Mrs. Huffman's activities at the children's schools." "Send them everything," Marshall replied. Every donation, every transaction, the evidence was damning. Isabella had been running parallel embezzlement schemes through various school charity foundations, using her position on their boards to siphon millions. In the federal detention center, Robert Lancaster was learning the cost of betrayal. His fellow inmates didn't take kindly to someone who had planned to leave thousands jobless. Isabella's arrest made headlines. Charity Queen's empire of fraud exposed. Her social circle evaporated overnight. The same people who had attended her lavish fundraisers now pretended they'd never known her. Alexandra faced her own reckoning at Harvard. The Academic Review Board had some uncomfortable questions about her admission and subsequent performance. The twins watched their Yale careers crumble as evidence of Robert's illegal donations emerged. Their trust funds, frozen by federal investigators, revealed a web of fraudulent transfers. Victoria and Andrew struggled with a different kind of loss. Their entire family narrative had been a lie. Marshall implemented sweeping changes at Pinnacle. New anti-fraud measures, transparent accounting practices, ethical oversight committees. The company's stock price responded positively to each reform. 1 year later, Marshall stood at a podium, accepting the Corporate Ethics Leadership Award. Pinnacle's value had tripled under his leadership. The company had become a model of corporate transparency. Integrity, he told the audience, is not negotiable. His eyes swept over the crowd, noting the absent faces of his former family. Alexandra was fighting to keep her Harvard degree. The twins had been expelled from Yale. Victoria and Andrew were learning harsh lessons about trust and betrayal. Robert watched the ceremony on prison TV, his 30-year sentence stretching before him. Through his cell window, he could see the sign of his former car dealership, now Marshall's Corporate Ethics Foundation headquarters. Isabella, awaiting her own trial, discovered the final irony of her betrayal. The prenuptial agreement she had insisted on, meant to protect her assets, now prevented her from claiming any of Marshall's legitimate wealth. "Your Honor," her lawyer argued in court, "Mrs. Huffman's charitable work, you mean her systematic embezzlement from school foundations?" The judge wasn't impressed. Marshall's foundation became a leader in exposing family-based corporate conspiracies. Its first case study, the bonus plan, became required reading at business schools. The story of how one family's greed nearly destroyed an empire, and how integrity ultimately triumphed, served as a warning to corporate America. Marshall's name became synonymous with ethical leadership, while Robert and Isabella became cautionary tales. In his CEO's office, Marshall reviewed the final numbers. Pinnacle had emerged stronger, more transparent, more valuable. His revenge hadn't just been complete, it had been profitable. Mr. Huffman, his assistant, called. "The prison warden is on line 1. Mr. Lancaster is requesting a meeting." Marshall's response was simple. No comment. He turned back to his work, the Manhattan skyline stretching behind him. They had taught him about family, loyalty, and betrayal. He had taught them about consequences. The Corporate Ethics Leadership Award sat on his desk, its inscription catching the light. To those who choose integrity over family loyalty when the two conflict, Marshall had made his choice. The empty chairs at his family table spoke louder than any revenge could have. Epilogue: the final ledger. 5 years later, Marshall Huffman stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office in the newly renamed Huffman Tower, formerly Pinnacle headquarters. At 53, his success had only amplified his commanding presence. The Wall Street Journal on his desk carried the headline, "Huffman Ethics Foundation expands global reach, corporate watchdog sets new standards." His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Huffman, the prison warden is on line 3. Put him through." Marshall's voice remained as measured as ever. "Mr. Huffman, Robert Lancaster is requesting another meeting. He claims to have information about additional offshore accounts. Tell him what you've told him the last dozen times. All communications go through the Foundation's legal team." The warden cleared his throat. "He's not doing well, sir." The appeal denial hit him hard. "Neither are the thousands whose pensions he tried to steal," Marshall replied. "Anything else?" "No, sir. Thank you for your time." Marshall pulled up the Foundation's latest report on his tablet. Robert Lancaster's fall had become their most comprehensive case study. 5 years into his 30-year sentence, the former CEO had aged decades. His attempts to bargain his way to a reduced sentence had failed consistently, each appeal revealing new layers of his fraud. The maximum security wing of federal prison was a far cry from his former penthouse. The only view from his cell was the gleaming headquarters of the Huffman Ethics Foundation, formerly his prized luxury car dealership. The Foundation's illuminated sign served as a nightly reminder of his downfall. Sarah, Marshall's longtime assistant and now the Foundation's COO, entered with a stack of reports. "The latest from the Isabella Lancaster case, sir." Marshall noted the name change. Isabella had reverted to Lancaster after the divorce, a final act of desperation that backfired spectacularly. The prenuptial agreement she'd insisted on had worked exactly as intended, just not in her favor. "How's she enjoying house arrest?" Marshall asked, though he already knew the answer. "The ankle monitor doesn't match her designer wardrobe," Sarah replied with a slight smile. The latest appeal was denied. Her legal team tried to argue that the Charity Foundation embezzlement was Robert's idea, and the evidence showed otherwise. "Your documentation was flawless, as usual." The judge particularly enjoyed the recordings of her bragging about fooling the school boards. Isabella's fall from grace had been absolute. After serving 3 years in federal prison for fraud and embezzlement, she'd been released to house arrest, not to her former mansion, but to a modest apartment her remaining family reluctantly provided. Her social circle had evaporated, her charity connections had become toxic, and her attempts to write a tell-all book had been blocked by the Foundation's legal team. "The children?" Marshall inquired, though he kept meticulous tabs on all of them. Sarah pulled up another report. "Alexandra completed her community service last month. The Harvard degree revocation stands. They found evidence of systematic cheating beyond even what we initially discovered. She's working as a junior analyst at a small firm in Milwaukee under her mother's maiden name." The twins, Thomas and Timothy, had faced their own reckonings. Yale's expulsion had led to a series of increasingly desperate attempts to trade on their former connections. Their trust funds, revealed to be built entirely on fraudulent transfers, had been seized and redistributed to Pinnacle's Victim Compensation Fund. "Thomas tried to contact the Foundation again," Sarah continued. He's offering to speak at our corporate ethics seminars. Timothy is still trying to day trade with what's left of their allowance. Victoria had chosen a different path. After the truth emerged about her family's crimes, she'd legally changed her name and enrolled in a public high school. Now in her second year of community college, she was the only one who'd made a clean break from her parents' influence. Andrew, the youngest at 20, was studying engineering at a state university under a merit scholarship, the only one of Marshall's children to earn his place legitimately. He occasionally sent progress reports through the foundation's legal team, maintaining professional but distant contact. The latest numbers from Pinnacle? Marshall asked, turning to the business empire he'd rebuilt from the ashes of Betrayal. Sarah projected the quarterly report onto the wall screen. Under Marshall's leadership, Pinnacle had become a model of corporate transparency and ethical governance. The stock price had quadrupled, the workforce had grown by 30%, and the company's ethical business practices had set new industry standards. The SEC is using our compliance framework as a template, Sarah noted. 3 other Fortune 500 companies have adopted our transparency protocols. Marshall nodded, turning to another matter. The Lancaster family's last attempt to access the offshore accounts? Failed spectacularly. Your early warning to the Swiss authorities proved invaluable. Robert's hidden transfers to his personal accounts were tracked and seized. Isabella's attempts to claim ignorance of the accounts backfired when our documentation showed her signature on the original paperwork. The Foundation's legal team had systematically dismantled every attempt by Robert or Isabella to salvage any part of their stolen fortune. Each appeal, each legal challenge, each desperate plea had only served to strengthen the case against them. Marshall's phone buzzed with a news alert. Lancaster charity fraud. New evidence reveals deeper conspiracy. The article detailed how Isabella's embezzlement from school foundations had begun even before her marriage to Marshall, a fact she'd hidden from everyone, including Robert. Your speech for next week's Ethics and Leadership Conference? Sarah inquired. Done. No mentions of names, as usual. The facts speak for themselves. The foundation had grown beyond even Marshall's initial vision. What started as a watchdog organization had evolved into a global authority on corporate ethics and family-based fraud prevention. Their case studies were taught at business schools worldwide, with the bonus plan remaining their most compelling example. A notification popped up on Marshall's screen, a message from Agent Phillips, now the FBI's Deputy Director of Financial Crimes. Thought you'd want to know. Robert tried to broker another deal. Claims he can expose Isabella's earliest frauds in exchange for a transfer to minimum security. We declined. Marshall's reply was brief. As expected, the Foundation's investigation had already uncovered those frauds, along with evidence that Robert had known about them from the beginning. Their mutual betrayal had been documented in exquisite detail, each partner planning to abandon the other once the trans-global merger was complete. Sarah cleared her throat. One more thing, sir. The Princeton Ethics Department wants to do a longitudinal study on the case. They're particularly interested in the children's rehabilitation outcomes. Forward them the public records. Nothing more. Marshall's position on his former family remained consistent, professional distance maintained through legal channels. He neither helped nor hindered their attempts to rebuild their lives, letting the consequences of their choices play out naturally. The sun was setting over Manhattan as Marshall reviewed the Foundation's latest initiative, a global database tracking family-based corporate fraud patterns. The system would help identify warning signs and prevent future schemes, using the Lancaster case as its baseline. Will you be attending Robert's next parole hearing? Sarah asked, though she knew the answer. No need. The documentation speaks for itself. Robert's previous hearings had become increasingly desperate performances. His attempts to portray himself as a victim of circumstances had crumbled under the weight of evidence. The parole board had access to every document, every recording, every betrayal. Isabella's latest court-mandated psychiatric evaluation had revealed what Marshall had known all along. Her remorse was as fraudulent as her charity work. She'd spent her prison time networking with white-collar criminals, already planning her next schemes. The Foundation's annual report is ready for review, Sarah noted. The section on preventing inherited positions of trust is particularly relevant. The report detailed how family connections had been used to disguise financial fraud using the Lancaster case as its primary example. Alexandra's grooming for Marshall's position, the twins' fraudulent Yale admissions, Victoria and Andrew's planned roles, all had been documented and analyzed. Marshall's phone buzzed again. A message from his corporate ethics professor at Harvard Business School. Your case study has transformed our curriculum. Would you consider giving this year's commencement address? He typed a brief acceptance. The irony wasn't lost on him. The institution that had unknowingly hosted part of Robert and Isabella's scheme would now hear from the man who exposed it. As night fell over Manhattan, Marshall stood at his office windows one last time. The city stretched before him, its lights reflecting off the Huffman Tower's glass facade. In a cell hundreds of miles away, Robert Lancaster would be watching the foundation sign illuminate the darkness. In her modest apartment, Isabella would be planning another doomed appeal. Their children, scattered across the country, would be facing their own daily reminders of choices and consequences. Alexandra in her entry-level position, the twins in their failed trading ventures, Victoria in her community college classes, Andrew in his engineering studies. Sarah appeared at his door. "Car's ready, sir." The foundation's board meeting starts in 30 minutes. Marshall gathered his papers. The foundation's latest initiative would help other companies identify and prevent family-based fraud schemes. The Lancaster case would continue teaching its lessons long after its principals had faced their final judgments. "One last thing," Sarah added. Isabella's publisher reached out again about the book deal. "Same answer as always," Marshall replied. "Let the evidence tell the story." He stepped into the elevator, descending toward the foundation's headquarters. The former luxury car dealership had been transformed into a center for corporate ethics research, its mission statement carved in marble. Integrity above all. In the end, Robert and Isabella had taught him valuable lessons about family, loyalty, and betrayal. Through the foundation, he would ensure those lessons benefited generations of corporate leaders to come. Their story had become a cautionary tale, their names synonymous with fraud and betrayal. But the true legacy of the Lancaster affair wasn't in their downfall. It was in the systems and safeguards their scheme had inspired. Marshall's revenge hadn't just been complete. It had been transformative. The empire they tried to steal had become a fortress of corporate integrity, their betrayal fueling a global movement for ethical business practices. As his car pulled away from the tower, Marshall allowed himself a small smile. They had taught him about the price of trust. He had taught the world about the value of truth. The final ledger was balanced. The books were closed. The bonus plan had paid its last dividend.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
The first time I met Brianna was at a coffee shop just off campus. I was a sophomore working part-time as a barista, juggling my studies with the demands of earning enough to stay afloat. She walked in with an air of confidence, her laughter filling the small space as she joked with a friend. I couldn't help but notice her vibrant energy. When she ordered a chai latte, I accidentally gave her a cappuccino instead, leading to an awkward exchange that ended with her smiling and saying, "I'll give you a pass, this time." That chance encounter turned into more. We kept bumping into each other at campus events, and I finally mustered the courage to ask her out. Our first date was nothing glamorous, just burgers at a local diner and a late-night walk by the lake. But it was perfect. Brianna was studying criminal justice, her dream to work in law driving her determination. I was captivated by her ambition and her ability to make me laugh until my sides hurt. By the time we graduated, we'd become inseparable. I secured an entry-level role at a publishing house, and Brianna found a position at a law firm. We worked long hours and lived in a tiny apartment with creaky floors and peeling wallpaper, but we were happy. It was during those years that we built the foundation of our life together. Long talks about our dreams, late-night dinners of cheap takeout, and laughter that echoed through those shabby walls. When our first child was born, life shifted in ways we couldn't have imagined. I remember holding her hand as she gave birth, marveling at her strength and the new chapter unfolding before us. Brianna temporarily stepped back from her career, pouring herself into motherhood while I climbed the corporate ladder. Despite the sleepless nights and endless diapers, we were a team. balancing the chaos with love and unwavering support for one another. As our family grew, so did the demands on our time and energy. We moved into a modest house, gradually transforming it into a home filled with memories. Brianna returned to work once our youngest started kindergarten, excelling as a paralegal. Watching her thrive professionally while managing our family with grace only deepened my admiration for her. Our days were hectic, but we always made time for each other. Weekly date nights and summer vacations where we'd reconnect away from the noise of everyday life. Looking back now, I realized those early years were filled with milestones that shaped us. Every triumph, every challenge, and every compromise brought us closer. We'd weathered storms before, financial stress, career shifts, and raising children. But nothing had prepared me for the crossroads we were about to face. The signs had been there, subtle yet persistent, but I was too blind to acknowledge them. For several weeks, the clues had been right before me, yet I failed to see them. My wife, Brianna, had begun lavishing me with an unusual amount of care and attention. Instead of the usual quick toast and coffee in the mornings, she started preparing elaborate breakfasts. Evening meals became a celebration of my favorite dishes, often accompanied by wine. She'd then appear in new lingerie, shower me with affection, and entice me to bed earlier than usual. Did I question this transformation in our 24 years together? Not at all. I welcomed the change as a refreshing turn in our routine. After our youngest child left for college a few months ago, I resolved to show Brianna how much I appreciated her. I made it a point to be home by 5 every evening. We began enjoying upscale dinners, attending local theater shows, and even tried dancing, a hobby we hadn't explored in years. I brought her flowers regularly and eagerly embraced this new phase of our empty nest lifestyle. My name is Tyler Winslow, though everyone calls me Ty. My wife, Brianna, Bree for short, and I had been married for almost 25 years. Like any relationship, we had our ups and downs, but the good times far outweighed the challenges. I was content with our life. I work as a senior director at a major publishing house, having climbed the ladder over 2 decades. My expertise spans every aspect of publishing, reviewing manuscripts, working with authors, coordinating with designers, negotiating contracts, managing budgets, and overseeing marketing and film rights. Introducing new authors and their books to the world has always been a point of pride for me. Brianna, nearly 45 years old and stunningly beautiful, has a career of her own. Thanks to good genes, a healthy lifestyle, and proper nutrition, we've both aged gracefully. People often compliment us as a striking couple. Since our youngest started kindergarten, Bree has been working as a paralegal at the prestigious law firm Thomas, Dixon & Harris. Over time, she was promoted to manage the paralegal team, overseeing assignments and workflow for the entire department. Everything changed last Wednesday. I came home as usual around 5 p.m. and found Bree in the kitchen, preparing dinner. For weeks now, her meals had been more elaborate and thoughtful than ever before. I kissed the back of her head as I walked in. Typically, Bree would turn to kiss me properly, but this time she didn't. "No grand welcome kiss for me today?" I teased. She responded without looking up. "I'm just glad you're home." Her tone felt distant, as if she was avoiding even a brief moment of connection. "Is something wrong?" I asked. "Nothing at all," she replied quickly. "Go change, and I'll have a glass of your favorite wine ready when you come back down." Though her response felt dismissive, I brushed off my unease and went upstairs. After hanging up my suit and tossing my shirt in the laundry basket, I changed into more comfortable clothes, a pair of Dockers and a sweatshirt. Dinner that night wasn't extravagant, but it was clear she'd put thought into it. We started with a simple salad of lettuce and tomatoes, followed by a main course of roasted pork served over cauliflower rice. As we toasted with glasses of wine, Bree looked at me and said, "You know I love you, right?" There was something different in her voice. This wasn't the usual casual "I love you" we exchanged daily. I nodded, replying, "And I love you too." After dinner, we cleared the table as usual. I loaded the dishwasher while Bree stored the leftovers. She excused herself to go upstairs and change into something more comfortable. Anticipating another romantic evening, I eagerly followed her lead. When I entered the dimly lit living room, I saw Bree reclining on the sofa in a revealing negligee that barely covered her. Her beauty took my breath away. Without hesitation, I knelt by the sofa and kissed her deeply. The moment was electric. My kisses trailed from her lips to her bare shoulders, and soon her negligee slipped off, exposing her chest. Her figure was stunning, and I couldn't help but admire her, as if for the first time. You love me, don't you, Ty? She whispered. You'll always love me no matter what? Of course, I assured her without hesitation. I quickly undressed and joined her on the sofa, where our passion ignited once more. Half an hour later, we lay entwined, savoring the afterglow. That night, she seemed more fervent than ever. It feels so good to rediscover the spark we've missed over the years, I said, kissing her gently. Our conversation drifted to compliments about how well we both maintained ourselves over the years. I teased that she could easily pass for someone in her early 30s, while she playfully ran her hand over my abs, praising my fitness. Just as I was drifting off, Bree's voice pulled me back. Honey, there's something I need to tell you, she said softly. Anything, I murmured, still half asleep. You know how much I love you, right? Her voice was barely audible. Yes, and I love you just as much, I replied. She hesitated before continuing. Darling, she began carefully. This Friday, I've made plans to meet someone from my office for the night. Her words hung in the air for a moment before they truly registered. When they did, I stood up abruptly and locked eyes with her. What is this? I asked, my voice firm. She tried to pull me back down, urging my head to rest on her chest again, but I resisted. No, seriously, what are you talking about? I pressed. It doesn't change anything about how we feel for each other, she said softly. I'll still love you, and you'll still love me. I blinked, taken aback. You can't be serious. Is this some kind of joke? She shook her head. No, Ty, I'm not joking. I have a date this Saturday with a man from my office. We're going out for dinner and dancing. After that, we'll go to his hotel room and I'll spend the night with him. I'll be back home late Sunday morning. I stared at her, stunned. So what you're really saying is that you're planning to spend Saturday night and Sunday morning sleeping with some guy? Don't put it like that, she said, frowning. That's crude and unnecessary. He's a good man and I like him. The shock jolted me fully awake. I began pulling on my clothes, signaling that our moment of closeness was over. It was clear to her that I was furious. Ty, please don't react this way, she pleaded. I still love you and you still love me. It's just this one time, and then it'll be over. In a week, everything will go back to the way it was and you'll forget about it. Forget about it? I snapped, disbelief dripping from my words. Who is this guy, Bree? Why are you trying to ruin everything we've built now when things are so good? She tightened the sash of her satin robe and replied, His name doesn't matter. It's not something you need to know, and I don't want you doing anything reckless. Besides, he's bigger than you, and he could hurt you if it came to that. Oh, trust me, I shot back. With my rage and a baseball bat, he wouldn't stand a chance. She sighed. It's just one night, Ty. He's leaving for New York on Sunday evening for good. He won't be back. He better leave, I growled, because if he doesn't, the next time he walks into court, it'll be on crutches. As my initial rage simmered, a deep sense of loss began to set in. Bree and I had been together for over 2 decades. She was my first and only lover. Temptations had come and gone, but I'd never acted on them. Now, this? How long has this been going on? I demanded. It's not a thing, she said, avoiding my gaze. We've barely touched. What does that even mean? Holding hands? Hugging? Kissing? Or more? I pressed, needing clarity. She stayed silent, which only confirmed my worst fears. If it had been something less passionate, she would have admitted it outright. Finally, she explained, he came to our firm about 6 months ago from a top New York law office to assist with a complex tax case. I worked closely with him, research, charts, graphs for court. Over time, we became close. 2 months ago, he told me he had feelings for me and wanted to sleep with me. But I didn't want to sneak off to some cheap motel or do something inappropriate at work. This was different. It needed to be special. He suggested I find a way to take a night away. I told him I couldn't lie to you. He asked if you might allow it just once. I wasn't sure, but I hoped you'd understand that this would only be a one-time thing and wouldn't change anything between us. Why? I demanded. Why would you risk everything we have? We're happy. We love each other. We have an incredible marriage, amazing kids, no financial worries, and our health. Why would you jeopardize that? She hesitated. Because my friend made me realize I've only ever been with you. He showed me what I might be missing. I just want to know what it's like. This will be enough. It'll make me feel whole. He cares about me, and I care about him. It's not some tawdry affair. But Bree, I protested, we have something rare and beautiful. You're the only woman I've ever been with, and I thought I was the only man you'd ever been with. You don't understand, she said, her voice trembling. I need this. I want this. I want him. Why? I asked, desperate for a reason. She sighed deeply. He's so attractive, Ty. He's younger than me, but still finds me irresistible. I'm drawn to him in a way I can't explain. I just need to experience this or I'll regret it forever. He feels the same way. Please, let me do this. Afterward, I'll be yours completely. I'll never agree to this, I replied firmly. It'll destroy us, Bree. It'll ruin our marriage. No, it won't, she insisted. Once it's over, I'll be the best wife you can imagine. I'll cook for you, keep the house immaculate, do the laundry, the shopping, everything. I'll be the perfect partner in every way, including the bedroom. You can have me anytime, however you want. I'll treat you like a king for the rest of our lives. I promise I'll never touch another man again. And I'll have to live with the fact that my wife slept with another man, I said bitterly. Do you know how humiliating that is for a man? It's the ultimate betrayal. You'll have to accept it, she said firmly. I'm going to do this, Ty. I need to. It won't change anything between us. You'll still love me, and I'll still love you. So that's what all the affection and attention over the last 2 months was about, I said coldly. It wasn't about us becoming empty nesters. You were trying to soften me up so I wouldn't push back on this insane idea. Well, guess what, Bree? That's not going to happen. Bree stood firm, unmoved by any of my arguments or objections. Her mind was made up and she wasn't going to reconsider. I didn't resort to pleading. She would have to deal with the fallout of her choices, whatever that might mean. I didn't yet know what consequences lay ahead. I went to our bedroom, packed a few items I'd need for the next day, grabbed my toiletries, and relocated to the guest room, which had its own attached bathroom in our spacious home. As I was moving my belongings, Bree tried to stop me. Don't do this, Ty, she said. Nothing's going to change. I know you're upset now, but by Sunday afternoon, this will all be behind us. We'll go back to being us. I paused, meeting her gaze. I'm not just upset, Bree, I replied, keeping my tone calm but resolute. If you go through with this, we'll never be us again. I closed the guest room door without waiting for her response. Inside, I was left alone with my thoughts, which swirled chaotically. I considered all the possible responses: divorce, moving out, demanding that Bree leave, physically stopping her from going, even telling her parents or our kids. But none of these options felt right. I couldn't bring myself to divorce her. I still loved her, despite her lapse in judgment. I wasn't about to leave my own home either, and evicting her, while tempting, felt extreme. I also doubted that involving her family or ours would solve anything. If Bree chose to call off her plans, it needed to be her decision, not one coerced by outside pressure. Otherwise, it might just push her into being more secretive in the future. It was Thursday evening, and it was clear that Bree had waited until the last minute to tell me. This tactic limited the time I had to process, respond, or try to prevent her from following through. I was terrified. She admitted to having feelings for this man, and I couldn't help but wonder, was she considering leaving me now that the kids were out of the house? The thought shattered me. What if she found their night together more satisfying than our closeness? What if this opened the door to more? For 25 years, Bree and I had shared a comfortable, familiar closeness. There weren't many surprises left in our physical relationship, but I still found her incredibly attractive. Whether she wore a sleek black dress, a hot negligee, or just a towel, her body had never stopped exciting me. But now, as much as I feared the future, I started to consider ways to stop her. Could I somehow prevent her from going through with this? If her Prince Charming left town before they met, I'd have time to remind her of what she was risking. And maybe, just maybe, I could make sure she never entertained an idea like this again. Before I finally fell asleep late that night, I devised a plan. Talking Bree out of her decision seemed impossible, but perhaps her employer could intervene. I knew that Thomas, Dixon, and Harris, the law firm where Bree worked, had strict rules against workplace relationships. If I spoke to one of the senior partners about her situation, they might confront her about how her actions could affect her career. The next morning, I woke up first. Normally, I'd brew coffee for Bree before leaving for work, but not today. When she greeted me with a hesitant, "Good morning," I didn't reply in kind. All I said was, "Don't do this," before leaving the house without our usual goodbye kiss. I knew she noticed the shift in my behavior. Later that morning, I drove downtown to the offices of Thomas, Dixon, and Harris. Their firm occupied the top floor of a modern skyscraper. The reception area was as sleek and impressive as I remembered from past events, an open layout with plush seating, a fully stocked bar, and walls adorned with tasteful artwork. Seated at the central reception desk was Emily Stratton, the firm's office manager. Emily and I had crossed paths many times over the years at local events, and while we weren't close, we were friendly acquaintances. Despite being in her mid-50s, Emily carried herself with grace and poise. Her conservative attire never drew attention to her figure, but she had an understated elegance that didn't go unnoticed. With her golden hair always pulled into a bun and glasses perched on her nose, she exuded professionalism. Emily's face lit up when she saw me walk in. "Tyler, what a nice surprise," she said warmly, stepping out from behind her desk to greet me. She gave me a quick hug, her cheerful demeanor temporarily lifting my gloom. "Emily," I said with a faint smile, "I need to speak with Mr. Thomas. It's personal and important." Her expression grew serious. "This is about Brianna, isn't it?" she asked perceptively. I hesitated before answering vaguely. "Maybe." Emily nodded knowingly and adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Thomas is just finishing up a meeting," she said, checking his schedule. "He has about half an hour before he heads out for lunch with clients." "I'll make sure he has a moment to talk with you." I thanked her and took a seat in the waiting area. A few minutes later, Emily brought me a cup of coffee. "I added a splash of Bailey's," she said with a wink. "You look like you need it." Her gesture of kindness brought a faint smile to my face, but my mind was still focused on the difficult conversation ahead. I only hoped that William Thomas could help me stop Bree before it was too late. Moments later, the intercom on Emily's desk buzzed. "I'm back in my office, Emily," came Mr. Thomas's voice. Emily seized the opportunity. "Mr. Thomas, Tyler Winslow is here. He's hoping to speak with you for a few minutes. It's important." There was a brief pause. Mr. Thomas replied thoughtfully. "If you think it's worth my time, send him in. I can spare about 5 minutes before my next appointment." Emily guided me through a pair of glass doors, down a short hallway, and to a large, intricately carved wooden door. She opened it, gesturing for me to step inside, and then closed it quietly behind me. The office was impressive, spacious and meticulously arranged. Mr. Thomas stood near his expansive desk, which was flanked by several chairs. On the opposite side of the room, a comfortable sitting area featured a sofa, an armchair, and a coffee table. The walls were adorned with framed degrees, awards, and plaques, underscoring his success. He stepped around the desk, extending his hand warmly. "Tyler, good to see you. How's life? Still in publishing?" "I'm doing okay," I replied, though my tone lacked enthusiasm. "Well, if Emily thinks it's important, it must be. What's on your mind?" As I stood there, I hesitated. The weight of the conversation suddenly felt overwhelming. Still, I forced myself to begin. "I hate to bring this to you, Mr. Thomas. Honestly, it's embarrassing." "What's going on, Ty?" he asked, his tone both curious and sincere. I took a deep breath. "My wife, Brianna, works here. She's told me she plans to spend Saturday night with one of your associates. I've tried everything to dissuade her, but she's adamant." Mr. Thomas, ever the sharp lawyer, grasped the situation immediately. "So, you're hoping I can step in? Maybe have a word with Brianna or this associate?" "That was my intention when I came here," I admitted. "But now I think I've made a mistake. This is my problem, and I need to handle it myself." He nodded slowly, considering my words. "You're aware, of course, that our firm has policies about workplace relationships, especially within the same department. Those policies exist to protect us from potential issues like conflicts of interest or legal liability." "Yes, I'm aware," I said quietly. Placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder, he continued. "Our fraternization policy isn't as robust as it should be. I've been meaning to tighten it, add clear consequences for violations. Unfortunately, I can't rewrite policy overnight, and certainly not before Saturday." I nodded, feeling a mix of frustration and resignation. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Thomas. I'm sorry to have bothered you with this. I need to figure out how to deal with it on my own." "Good luck, Ty," he said as I turned to leave. I stepped back into the reception area, where Emily was waiting with a curious look. "How did it go?" she asked. "It was a mistake to bring this to him," I admitted. "I feel foolish." Emily gave me a kind smile. "You're being too hard on yourself. Sit down and take a moment. I'll bring you another coffee or something stronger if you'd prefer." I sank into one of the plush chairs in the waiting area, running my hands over my face as my thoughts raced. I felt defeated, completely out of options. Bree seemed determined to go through with her plans, and I didn't know how to stop her. Overwhelmed, I leaned forward, my head in my hands. Emily's cheerful voice broke through my despair. "Come on, Ty, let's go to lunch. My treat." I hesitated, but the idea of stepping away and clearing my head was appealing. I agreed, and Emily arranged for a colleague to cover for her while she took an extended break. As we walked to a nearby restaurant she liked, she linked her arm with mine in a gesture of support. Over iced tea, Emily gently encouraged me to open up. I hesitated, but eventually I told her everything. She listened quietly, nodding at the right moments. After we ordered, she chose soup and half a sandwich while I picked at a Caesar salad. Our conversation shifted to lighter topics. When we finished eating, Emily ordered coffee for both of us, and we sat in companionable silence for a while. Then Emily broke the silence with something unexpected. "Did you know my late husband was a fighter pilot?" "I knew you were widowed," I replied, "but I didn't know he was a pilot." Her expression softened. "Joe was my hero. We married right after he graduated from the Air Force Academy. He flew A-10S, the Warthog, as they call it. He served 2 tours in the Middle East before he was tragically eliminated in a training accident." I listened as she recounted his service, including the honors he received: the Silver Star, the Distinguished Flying Cross, and 2 Bronze Stars. Her voice wavered slightly as she spoke, but there was pride in her words. "Joe used to tell me about air combat strategies," she continued. "One scenario stuck with me. When facing a single enemy fighter, a 2-plane formation would split up. The enemy had to pick a target, pursue one, and leave the other free to attack, or try to target both and fail. Either way, the enemy lost." Emily's story intrigued me, though I wasn't sure what she was driving at. "Are you talking about Bree's date?" I asked. She smiled, her eyes sharp with meaning. "Give her a choice, Ty. No matter what she chooses, make sure you win." Her words hung in the air as she reached across the table, gently taking my hand. Her smile was disarming, filled with quiet encouragement, and for the first time that day, I felt a glimmer of hope. After lunch with Emily, I went back to the office, immersing myself in work to avoid going home to Bree. The thought of spending an evening in her company, pretending everything was normal, felt unbearable. Later, I stopped by the Iris Club, a cozy spot where I could enjoy a few drinks with friends and momentarily distract myself. It was almost 10 p.m. when I finally returned home, and Bree was waiting for me, her frustration evident. "You didn't even bother to call," she said, her tone sharp. "I went out of my way to make a nice dinner for us. It's sitting in the fridge. I was hoping we could spend some time together tonight, maybe even reconnect. And now I can smell the booze on you." "Yes, I had a few drinks," I replied bluntly. "I stayed out because I didn't want to face this situation tonight. I needed to forget, just for a little while, about what you're planning tomorrow." I headed toward the guest room without waiting for her response. "I'm tired and going to bed." Her voice followed me down the hallway. "Don't worry, Ty. Tomorrow will come and go, and this will all be behind us. We'll go back to how things were before." I didn't reply. I simply shut the door, stripped to my boxers, and collapsed onto the guest bed, exhaustion and frustration weighing heavily on me. The next morning, I was up early. I downed a quick breakfast, just coffee and toast, and headed outside to work on the yard. Mowing the lawn, pulling weeds, and tidying up the space gave me something to focus on. When I came back inside, sweaty and tired, Bree was getting ready to head out. "I've got a spa appointment," she announced nonchalantly. "Manicure, pedicure, the whole thing. I'll be back in a few hours." I leaned against the kitchen counter, watching her. "Bree, don't do this," I said quietly but firmly. "It won't end the way you think it will." She paused briefly but didn't respond, disappearing through the door and leaving me alone once again. When she returned later that afternoon, it was clear she'd gone all out. Her hair was pinned up in an elegant style, her nails painted a bold, vibrant red. She looked radiant, too radiant. I could tell she was preparing for something special. Meanwhile, I'd been busy as well. The living room had been transformed, the furniture rearranged, and the rug rolled up to reveal an open space. Bree stopped in her tracks, taking in the room. "What's going on, Ty? Why is the rug rolled up, and why is the coffee table pushed to the side?" "I made room for dancing," I said casually. "I thought we could have a romantic evening together." She crossed her arms, skepticism etched across her face. "What are you trying to pull?" "Nothing underhanded," I replied. "I just want to show you that staying home tonight would be the better choice. Let me show you something." I gestured toward the dining room. Reluctantly, she followed me. I'd set the table with meticulous care, using our best china, crystal glasses, and silver flatware. A bouquet of roses sat in the center, flanked by 2 tall candles, their warm glow creating a passionate atmosphere. It was the kind of table you'd find in a high-end restaurant. "Ty," she said slowly, her voice firm, "I see what you're doing, but it's not going to work. You know I already have plans tonight." "I know what your plans are," I said evenly. "But plans can change. Sometimes something better comes along. Are you really going to disappoint me for him?" "Ty, don't do this to yourself," she said, shaking her head. Ignoring her words, I led her to the kitchen where the evening's menu was already underway. "Let me walk you through what I've prepared," I began. "We'll start with a chilled green gazpacho, garnished with chopped yellow tomatoes and cucumber. Then, a crisp salad of iceberg lettuce with avocado and bacon, drizzled with ranch dressing. To cleanse the palate, I've made a lime sorbet." "Ty, stop," she said softly. "You're putting so much effort into this, and it's not going to change my mind," I continued, undeterred. "The main course is a pork chop stuffed with rice and herbs, finished with a béarnaise sauce. On the side, asparagus sautéed with garlic butter and creamy potato gratin. For dessert, a scoop of vanilla ice cream with green crème de menthe. We'll finish with coffee and your choice of liqueur." Bree sighed, exasperation mingled with guilt. "It sounds amazing, but I'm leaving tonight. I even bought a new dress for the occasion." She turned and headed upstairs. I heard the shower running as I went to our bedroom to change. I put on a pair of black pants, a fitted black shirt, and leather dance shoes. A formal suit seemed unnecessary for a dinner at home. When Bree came downstairs, my heart sank. She was stunning. Her black dress hugged her figure perfectly, with a neckline that drew attention to her décolletage. The hemline stopped modestly above her knees, but the slit along the side climbed daringly high, revealing a glimpse of her stocking tops as she moved. Her heels, adorned with delicate diamond-studded straps, added the finishing touch. "How do I look?" she asked, spinning slightly to show off the ensemble. Anger simmered beneath the surface, but I kept my tone calm. "You look incredible," I said, forcing a tight smile. "Like you're dressed to impress someone, but not me." "It's a special night, Ty. I wanted to look my best. Don't worry. I'll wear this for you another time," she said dismissively, walking past me toward the door. As I flipped through the radio stations, George Michael's Careless Whisper came on, a song that always pulled at my emotions. I turned up the volume, letting the familiar melody wash over me. "Can I have one last dance before you go?" I asked softly. Bree hesitated for a moment, then gave a reluctant nod. "All right, just one." I walked over, gently took her hand, and pulled her into a slow embrace. We swayed to the rhythm, her body close against mine. The scent of her perfume was achingly familiar, stirring memories of better times. "You're wearing English leather," she murmured, a faint smile on her lips. "I know it's your favorite," I replied. As the song reached its final verses, I trailed soft kisses along her cheek and down her neck. She sighed, her response almost instinctive, a gentle sound of contentment. Encouraged, I slid my hand to the strap of her dress, easing it off her shoulder while kissing her neck. She froze, pulling back abruptly. "No, Ty, don't. You know I'm leaving tonight. We can do this another time." I held her gaze for a moment, my voice low and steady. "It's not too late to change your mind." Her expression hardened. "I'm not changing my plans, Ty. I told you I'm going on this date, and I don't want you to ruin it." Exhaling slowly, I stepped back. "All right, Bree, I won't interfere anymore. You've made your choice, and I see it's final. But before you walk out that door, there are two things I want you to do." Suspicion flickered across her face. "What are they?" "First," I said, gesturing toward the dining room, "I want you to see what I've done. Look at the table I set for us tonight. I want you to remember it as you walk out." I lit the candles and dimmed the lights, bathing the room in a soft golden glow. The scene was passionate and romantic, a picture of what could have been. Bree glanced at the setup and shrugged. "We can have a romantic dinner another time, Ty." I stepped closer, took her left hand, and carefully slid off her wedding and engagement rings. "Second, I don't want you touching him while wearing the rings I gave you. These are symbols of us, and you're choosing to leave them behind tonight." Her eyes widened slightly as I placed the rings, along with my own wedding band, on the small hallway table. For a moment, she looked uncomfortable, even guilty. "Okay," she said quietly. As Bree reached for her shawl and clutch, the doorbell rang. Both of us turned toward the sound, surprised. Through the frosted glass, a figure stood silhouetted. "Who could that be at this hour?" she muttered, moving to open the door. When she did, her voice caught in a mix of surprise and confusion. "Emily? What are you doing here?" I stepped forward, taking Emily's hand and guiding her inside. Bree's eyes darted to Emily's outfit, a striking cocktail dress far removed from her usual conservative work attire. The scarlet dress clung to Emily's curves, with off-the-shoulder straps tied in delicate bows. Her legs were accentuated by French-style red stockings, and her updo was decorated with a ribbon matching her dress. "Ty invited me," Emily said smoothly, her gaze drifting to the candlelit dining table. "He promised me an evening of romance, dinner by candlelight, slow dancing, and cozying up by the fireplace. How could I say no?" Bree's expression shifted from shock to disbelief. "You look so different from how you dress at work," she blurted out. Emily smirked, adjusting the strap of her dress. "I like to dress up for special occasions. And you look stunning, too. That dress will be fun for Stanley to take off." Bree froze. "Stanley? How do you know about him?" Emily laughed lightly, her tone almost mocking. "Oh, everyone in the paralegal department knows about Stanley. The tax department, too. Stanley isn't exactly subtle." Bree's cheeks flushed. "We tried to be discreet." "Discreet?" Emily interrupted with a laugh. "From the moment Stanley arrived, he made his intentions obvious, and you didn't resist. Shorter skirts, plunging necklines, more makeup, and his favorite perfume. Honestly, you were an open book." Bree looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was supposed to be harmless, just a little flirting. Then I got caught up in it. I thought it would be just one night." I stepped forward, draping her shawl over her shoulders and guiding her toward the door. "One night, huh? Fine. Go, but don't come back until tomorrow morning. I've given you every chance to stay with me, but you chose him." Bree hesitated for a moment, her face a mix of guilt and defiance. "I'll be back," she said quietly as she stepped onto the porch. "Have fun tonight," I said, closing the door behind her. For a moment, I stood in silence, hearing her car pull away. My chest felt heavy with the weight of what had just happened. Things would never be the same again. Emily approached, her expression softening. "I can't imagine how you feel, Ty," she said gently. "But remember, no matter what choice Bree makes, you've already won." She reached up, cupping my face in her hands. Her lips met mine, a gentle, reassuring kiss that slowly deepened. I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her closer as the kiss became more passionate. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were breathing heavily. "Let's not waste the evening," Emily said with a small smile. "Show me this dinner you've prepared." I told Emily that dinner wasn't quite ready, but invited her to help if she felt like it. She agreed with a smile, following me into the kitchen. I pointed to 3 open bottles of wine, a crisp Chardonnay, a bold Cabernet, and a sweeter dessert option. She chose the Chardonnay. After pouring her a glass and tasting it myself, I playfully slipped an apron over her head and tied it around her waist. Standing behind her, I gave her a quick kiss, which made her laugh. "What's my assignment, chef?" she asked, clearly enjoying herself. "I've already baked half a pound of bacon," I said. "I need you to cut 5 strips into 1-inch pieces and mix them with the chopped iceberg lettuce. Then, dice the avocado and add it to the mix." While Emily worked, sipping her wine and chatting lightly, a sudden wave of self-doubt crept in. I glanced at her, the most stunning woman I'd ever been close to, and couldn't shake the thought that I might not measure up. My entire life I'd only been with one woman, Bree, while Emily might have had far more experience. The thought unnerved me. I stepped up behind her, gently placing my hands on her waist. "I've only ever made love to Bree," I confessed quietly. "It makes me worry that I won't be good enough for you." Emily paused and leaned back against me, her tone reassuring. "Ty, you have nothing to worry about. Just treat me the way you'd treat Bree, and let's see where it goes. If I want something different, I'll tell you, and if there's something you want, just say so. Whatever it is." She turned her head slightly and added with a playful smile, "And, by the way, I love foreplay." I kissed the back of her head, feeling a flicker of confidence return. "Thanks. Have you ever been a cheerleader? You sure know how to inspire someone." She laughed. "The salad's done," she announced, taking the bowl into the dining room. I followed, pulling out her chair and helping her sit before taking my own seat at the head of the table. Before starting, I refilled our glasses and raised mine for a toast. "To an unforgettable night," she said, her eyes sparkling. "I'll drink to that," I replied. Dinner unfolded beautifully. I served each course, and Emily complimented every dish, calling it a 5-star meal that could rival any fine dining experience. When dessert was finished, I told her to relax in the family room while I tidied up. Once the dining area was spotless, I joined her. The soft sounds of rain and distant thunder played on the stereo, creating a soothing backdrop. Emily was gently swaying to the music, lost in the moment. When I approached, she held out her hands, inviting me to dance. We moved together slowly, the closeness of the moment deepening. "This is perfect, Ty," she murmured. "It's been so long since I felt this romantic." "I feel the same," I admitted. After a moment of silence, she added, "For what it's worth, I haven't been with a man in years. And when I have, it's only been with men I truly liked." "I really like you, Ty." "That's good to know," I said, pulling her a little closer. "If I tell you I love you at some point tonight, don't be mad. I'll mean it, at least for as long as we're together. And when this ends, I hope we can stay close." The music slowed, and so did we, eventually just holding each other. Her arms were around my neck, mine resting on her waist. Her breath was warm against my skin as she ran her fingers through the hair at the back of my neck. I felt her body pressed against mine, her curves, her warmth. She must have felt my reaction, too. I leaned down and began to kiss her neck and collarbone, savoring her soft sighs. As the moment intensified, Emily gently stepped back. "Give me a few minutes to change into something more comfortable," she said with a teasing smile. "Feel free to do the same. Let's meet by the fireplace." I went to my room, slipping into black silk pajama pants and a matching t-shirt. Pouring myself a coffee with a splash of Bailey's, I settled on the couch to wait. A few minutes later, I heard her approach. Before I could turn, Emily's arms wrapped around the back of the couch. Her hands slid under my shirt, and she kissed my neck, sending a jolt of warmth through me. I turned onto my back, looking up at her. She stood there in a black satin robe, the fabric loosely tied at the waist. Beneath it, I could see the delicate lace of a negligee. Her hair was down, framing her face, and her legs were bare. I reached for her hand, pulling her over the back of the couch. She landed on me with a laugh, her robe parting slightly. I couldn't resist leaning up to kiss her. What started as a gentle kiss quickly deepened, her lips parting as we shared a passionate embrace. My hands roamed over her back, slipping the robe off her shoulders to reveal her smooth skin and the soft fabric of her negligee. She was breathtaking. I let the robe slide down her arms until it pooled on the floor, leaving her in just the negligee that clung to her figure. I kissed her again, losing myself in the moment, unable to resist her allure. As my kisses moved lower, I traced a path down Emily's body, lingering at her navel before continuing to her thighs. She began to writhe beneath me, her breathing quick and shallow. "I love you, Ty," she whispered between breaths. "I love you too, Emily," I replied, my words barely breaking the rhythm of the moment. I didn't want this night to end. I knew it would be the last time we shared something so passionate, and it seemed Emily felt the same. Tears slipped from her eyes as she clung to me. I held her tightly, kissing her lips, her face, and her neck as though trying to hold on to the moment. Eventually, we both sighed, the reality of dawn drawing the night to a close. I stepped out of the shower first, giving Emily time to finish while I dried off and dressed in casual clothes. She emerged moments later, and I handed her a soft, oversized towel. She had brought a change of clothes, and soon we were both ready to leave the house. "Do you want to grab brunch?" I asked. Her face lit up, and she nodded. "I'd love that." We headed to a nearby cheesecake factory in a bustling shopping center. It was just opening when we arrived at 10 a.m., and we lingered over coffee and conversation before heading back. By the time I returned home around noon, Bree's car was already in the garage. I entered through the side door, passing through the kitchen, where I noticed a pot of coffee on the stove. Pouring myself a cup, I made my way to the dining room and found Bree seated at the table, a coffee cup in front of her. Her posture was rigid, her expression stern. In contrast, I felt calm, almost smug. A faint smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. It was time to address the elephant in the room. "So," I began, "how was your evening?" "Fine," Bree replied flatly, her tone guarded. "And yours?" she asked pointedly. "Honestly," I said, leaning back with a satisfied grin, "it was incredible. Emily was affectionate and eager, and we spent the night exploring ways to make each other happy." Bree lowered her head, and I saw a single tear roll down her cheek. Guilt surged through me. This wasn't the victory it had seemed in the moment. It felt more like the biggest mistake of my life. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Didn't Stanley live up to your expectations?" "It wasn't Stanley," she snapped, then softened. "It was me. I couldn't stop thinking about you and Emily, about what you were doing together. She's so beautiful, so alluring. I knew you'd have a better time with her than I ever could with Stanley." She took a deep breath before continuing. "He tried to be gentle, to make the night romantic, but I couldn't focus. I started drinking wine at the bar before dinner. By the time we sat down, I'd already had too much. I barely touched my food, I couldn't eat, and just kept drinking. Stanley tried to stop me, suggested we dance in the living room to lighten the mood, but I was tipsy and clumsy. He grew frustrated and said we should go upstairs. She hesitated, her voice shaking. In the room, he kissed me, but it felt wrong. Then he started undressing me, and I didn't resist. I let him, but I felt nothing. No excitement, no connection. He could tell. When it was over, he looked at me with disappointment and said, "That was the worst experience of my life. What's wrong with you? You wanted this, and now you're acting like you don't care." He got dressed and left, muttering something about finding someone else at the bar. I just lay there and cried myself to sleep. Her voice grew quieter. When I woke up, it was morning. The sun was shining, and I felt empty. I showered, dressed, and left the hotel. I wanted to come home and talk to you, but you weren't here. "Emily and I went to brunch," I said plainly. "She went home afterward. I'll admit, I'm sorry your night didn't go as planned, but I'm not entirely sorry. Mine did." Bree's eyes filled with fresh tears. "I'm so sorry, Ty," she said earnestly. "I regret ever getting involved with Stanley. Now I see it for what it was. He just wanted to use me. He never cared about me." I leaned back, my tone sharp. "Well, maybe you'll have better luck next time." "There won't be a next time," she said quickly, her voice breaking. "I'll never do this again. I want us to go back to being monogamous, to the way things were before. I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I can be the wife you deserve." "Not so fast, Bree," I said firmly. "You've spent months building an emotional relationship with him and weeks plotting this night together. Now that it's blown up in your face, you want me to forget everything and pretend it never happened? That's not how this works. I'm not even sure I want to stay married to you. You betrayed me, humiliated me, and tried to turn me into a fool. And now you expect me to forgive and forget like nothing happened? No, Bree. It doesn't work like that." Bree sat silently, tears streaming down her face as the weight of my words hung in the air. Bree's eyes searched mine, filled with a mixture of desperation and hope, but I continued without hesitation. "Next year, I'm making some changes for myself. I'm getting a gym membership, and once a month, I'll take myself out on a date with whoever I choose. If those dates lead to something more, so be it. At the end of the year, I'll reassess our marriage. If I decide it's no longer working for me, I'll file for divorce. If I find I'm happy, I'll consider becoming exclusive with you again. You'll have this year to prove that staying together is worth it. Take it or leave it. If you can't accept these terms, I'll start divorce proceedings on Monday. Let me know your decision." Bree's voice trembled as she began to speak. "Ty, I love you. I know I've taken you for granted, and I regret it deeply. The thought of you being with another woman would liquidate me, just like last night did. But losing you entirely, that would destroy me. I'll agree to your conditions. And I promise I'll spend this year showing you I can be the best wife you've ever dreamed of. By the end of it, I'll make sure you'll never want to leave me." "Then it's settled," I said simply. The rest of the day passed without incident. I spent some time working in the yard and running errands. Before heading out, I offered her an olive branch. "If you clean up the mess from last night and straighten up the house, I'll take you out to TGI Fridays for dinner. We can split a plate of ribs." It wasn't much, but it was my way of trying to restore some normalcy. As the probationary year began, Bree seemed to embrace her role wholeheartedly. She became an attentive and doting wife, and her efforts felt genuine. Our meals improved dramatically. Dinner often featured a small salad or soup, a hearty main course like steak with potatoes or vegetables, and even dessert. Each meal was accompanied by a glass of wine. Afterward, we worked together to clean up. Our closeness also intensified, becoming more frequent and passionate. Bree made it clear there was nothing she wouldn't do to rekindle the spark between us. One evening, over a particularly good dinner, Bree broke the silence with a casual remark. "I spoke to Emily today." I tried to keep my expression neutral. "Oh? What about?" Bree smiled faintly. "You, me, and her." "What did she say?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. "Well," Bree began, "the first thing she did was invite me to lunch. She took me to one of her favorite restaurants nearby. Over a couple of glasses of wine and some salad, I asked her point blank if she planned to take you away from me. She laughed and said, "Absolutely not. Ty and I were a one-time thing. We're best friends now, but we'll never be together like that again. If anything, I think he's still upset about how hurt he was by your actions." Bree hesitated, then continued. "I told her how ashamed I am of what I did to you and to our marriage. I also told her about your decision to date other women once a month and reevaluate our relationship at the end of the year." "And what was her advice?" I asked. "She said, don't try to compete with other women. Instead, make staying home with you so irresistible that he won't want to go on those dates. Turn your home into the better option. That's exactly what I plan to do." "If that's your strategy," I replied with a small grin, "don't be surprised if I set up a fake date just to see what you've got planned." A few weeks later, I found myself walking into the offices of Thomas, Dixon, and Harris with a smile on my face. Emily, as usual, was stationed at her desk, guarding the entrance to the partners' offices. When she saw me, her face lit up. She stood and walked over to greet me, wrapping me in a warm hug. "Ty, it's great to see you," she said warmly. "We've been expecting you, or rather, Mr. Thomas has." As I held her briefly, I asked, "Any idea what he wants to talk to me about?" Emily smirked. "Of course I know everything that happens here. But it's better if you hear it from him." She returned to her desk and buzzed Mr. Thomas. After a brief exchange, she gestured for me to follow her, leading me to his office and opening the large, carved wooden door. She gave me a quick smile before closing it behind me. "Ty," Mr. Thomas greeted warmly, standing and extending his hand. "Good to see you again. Please, have a seat." I took the chair opposite him, and he leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "I wanted to talk to you for two reasons, both of which directly or indirectly involve you." He paused for a moment before continuing. "First, I thought you'd like to know that we've updated our company's fraternization policy. It's much more comprehensive now. It explicitly outlines the consequences of workplace relationships, whether between employees or employees and clients. I've got a copy here for you to review at your leisure. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it." I thanked Mr. Thomas for addressing the issue I had brought to his attention previously. His thoughtfulness and initiative had not gone unnoticed. "Ty," he said, his tone considerate, "without prying too much, how are things at home? I genuinely hope you and Bree are finding your way forward." He paused briefly before adding, "I visited Bree's department a few days ago. We didn't talk about anything personal, strictly work-related matters. I wanted to check on her team's progress and see if there were any challenges I could help with. From what I observed, she seemed happy and at ease." Not wanting to delve into the current state of my marriage, I kept my response simple. "Things are improving, and I'm optimistic that we'll be all right in the long run." Mr. Thomas smiled warmly. "I'm glad to hear that," he said. "Now let me tell you the second reason I wanted to speak with you today. It concerns a letter I sent to Hughes, Duvet, and Lewis, the firm where Stanley Wilbur is employed. Despite everything, Stanley did provide excellent assistance with a particularly complex tax issue we faced. His expertise was instrumental, and I made sure to acknowledge that. However," he added, lifting a piece of paper from his desk, "I also felt compelled to address another, less favorable aspect of his behavior. I thought you might want to hear what I wrote." Adjusting his glasses, Mr. Thomas began to read aloud. "Dear Steve, you have already received an official performance report regarding Stanley Wilbur's contributions to Thomas, Dixon, and Harris. His knowledge and expertise were invaluable in resolving a challenging tax case, and he went above and beyond by equipping our attorneys with skills to manage similar cases in the future. However, this letter is informal and private, intended to share a different perspective. While Stanley demonstrated commendable technical abilities, his personal conduct during his time here was problematic. He initiated a relationship with one of our married employees, which escalated to physical involvement. This inappropriate relationship caused significant turmoil in the employee's personal life, straining her marriage to the point where its future remains uncertain. Lawyers already contend with a less-than-stellar reputation in the public eye, often seen as valuing profit over ethics or winning over justice. In this profession, integrity is paramount. Stanley's actions raise concerns about his personal honesty, which could very well extend to his professional behavior. With this in mind, I urge you to monitor the work Stanley performs at your firm carefully. While this letter is strictly between us, I trust you'll take whatever action you believe is appropriate, or none at all. The choice is yours. Sincerely, William." Mr. Thomas folded the paper and set it aside. This letter doesn't capture everything Stanley put you and Bree through, but it ensures that his actions won't come without repercussions. I doubt this will help him advance in his career, at least not as quickly as he might hope. This is the best I can do for you, Ty, he continued. I hope it brings some sense of closure, knowing that Stanley won't escape unscathed. I nodded, gratitude evident in my expression. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Your support means a lot to me. As I left his office, I found myself lost in thought, processing the conversation. I didn't even notice Emily standing nearby until she gently interrupted. How are you feeling about everything? She asked softly, studying my face. I took a moment before replying. Honestly, I feel good about how it's all played out. Things are starting to come together. I can't thank you enough for being there for me through all of this. Emily smiled warmly and pulled me into a tight hug. Don't forget, Ty, she said softly. I've grown from this too. I really did love you while we were together. And I loved you too, I replied, my voice steady yet filled with emotion. Growing up in a small town, I admired people who overcame their circumstances to achieve greatness. My brother Jeff and I shared that admiration, though our lives were often shaped by circumstance. Watching the Maple Grove Mills, a key part of our community, decline after being taken over by outside investors was tough. As the local economy crumbled, so did the town's spirit, and I realized real change had to come from within. Years later, after establishing our careers, an opportunity arose. We co-founded Falcon Associates with Lucy, Dennis, and Marty, aiming to not just revive a business, but to restore a way of life that was disappearing. Although none of us could predict the challenges ahead, we were hopeful. We each earned $250,000 annually, reasonable for a startup in a risky industry, with standard benefits. To address Jeff's security concerns, we hired a firm for ongoing protection. Lucy and Dennis also opted to keep their families out of the public eye. In case of the worst, we all had life insurance policies worth $10 million to protect our families. I'm Roger Richardson, born and raised in Rose Valley. You'll notice I didn't call it home, and that's central to my story. Jeff and I weren't mill kids. Our parents ran Richardson's Garden, the town's only Chinese restaurant. Opened in 1947 by our grandparents, it's still operated by our mom today. My grandfather, a veteran and son of Portland restaurateurs, saw an opportunity in Rose Valley to open a place catering to soldiers returning from the Pacific who craved Asian flavors. The restaurant originally kept some of the menu from the coffee shop it replaced, including the famous fried chicken recipe, which is still served every Friday. My grandparents lived above the restaurant until they built a house and tea garden behind it after my dad was born. When Grandpa passed and Grandma retired, my parents took over, and Jeff and I spent our childhood afternoons there under Grandma's care. My childhood friend, Kathy Henderson, lived next door to my grandparents' house. Her father was a sheriff's deputy, and her mom worked part-time at Richardson's Garden. When we were kids, Kathy told her mom she would marry me someday, and we did. We stayed close through school, and after Kathy graduated, we both went to Portland State University. In 2001, I earned my MBA, Kathy got her accounting degree, and Jeff passed the Oregon bar. We all returned to Rose Valley to start our careers. Jeff as a lawyer, Kathy as an accountant for Maple Grove, and me as an engineer. Kathy and I had been unofficially engaged since childhood, but we made it official after returning home, getting married that September. In 2002, tragedy struck. Kathy's dad was eliminated in an accident, and later that year, my dad passed away from pancreatic cancer. Our moms decided to live together, and Kathy and I moved into my childhood home, where we started our family. Our daughter, Lana, was born on October 24th, 2003. She was perfect. Rose Valley had always seemed insulated from national economic swings, especially with Maple Grove Mills producing goods people always needed. However, when the housing crisis hit, even our town felt the impact. Though we didn't have the large homes sprouting up elsewhere, many locals were lured into refinancing at low rates, only to find themselves in deep debt when the bubble burst in 2008. That's when Daniel Moore, president of Moore Equity Partners, appeared. His private equity firm offered to buy Maple Grove Mills, promising salvation for those struggling with mortgages. The town split between those supporting and opposing the buyout. I was against it, believing Congress might offer relief soon and that Moore's offer undervalued the company. Plus, Moore himself came off as arrogant, and something about him felt off. Despite these concerns, most people voted for the sale, enticed by the money that would help pay off their debts. In October 2008, Maple Grove Mills became Maple Grove Inc., ending its 102-year local ownership. Problems began right away. Local farmers were forced to lower prices, quality control issues emerged, and even the packaging suffered. Yet management claimed everything was fine because profits and sales were up. I couldn't understand how such poor management could still run a profitable company. My concerns grew, and I began to question if I should leave and help my mom run Richardson's garden instead. Kathy, my wife, didn't share my worries, insisting it wasn't our responsibility as employees to care about the company's direction, as long as paychecks kept coming. Our conversations about work became fewer, and Kathy wasn't happy about my thoughts of quitting. Meanwhile, Lana's solution to my frustrations was hosting tea parties with her dolls, which always made me smile. In January 2009, a new president took office, and the government rolled out programs to help homeowners. While some still debate whether these programs worked, I remain frustrated that we couldn't convince the mill's employees to hold out and try for a better solution. By summer 2009, it was clear this wasn't just another recession. The economy was in free fall, and despite reporting record profits, Maple Grove started laying off employees for the first time since the Great Depression. Management assured us the layoffs wouldn't be long-term and that severance benefits would help. However, it was clear that the 30% let go were mostly those who had opposed the sale to more equity partners. "You'll get your kitchen job after all," Kathy mocked as we waited for my turn to be fired. I ignored her, focusing instead on spending time with Lana. When HR called me, I told Sharon, the manager, to skip the severance talk. I refused to sign the non-disclosure agreement or waiver. Sharon, who had also voted against the buyout, understood my frustration. We parted on good terms, and I invited her to dinner at the restaurant sometime. After leaving, I picked Lana up from school. Kathy didn't answer her phone, so I called her and Lana's grandmothers to let them know they wouldn't need to pick Lana up. Something felt off when I got home, and I soon found Kathy's note on the kitchen table. She said she was leaving me for someone better, taking Lana, and if I didn't sign the divorce papers, I'd never see my daughter again. I immediately called Jeff, telling him what happened. He urged me to leave the house and bring the note to his office. Once there, Jeff and his boss, Alex, quickly read the note. Alex explained that Kathy's plan had failed. She intended to take Lana while I was busy in an exit interview, probably heading out of state. Jeff asked if I knew who she was leaving me for, but I had no idea. Likely one of the managers Moore had brought in, though Kathy never mentioned names. Alex reassured me that Oregon law prioritizes the child's best interests, not the parent's gender, and that Kathy's threat would work against her in court. He explained that since Lana was with me and we had a strong family support system, Kathy's note would backfire. Threatening to withhold a child to force a spouse to sign divorce papers would be a major strike against her in custody decisions. We filed a counterclaim, arguing that Kathy's plan to take our daughter and use threats to force my signature on the divorce papers proved she shouldn't have custody. Since I left work early and picked up Lana, her plan failed. The court granted me temporary custody, and we prepared for a legal fight. It wasn't long before Kathy's someone better was revealed, Daniel Moore. Not surprising, right? Moore's arrogance and wealth worked against him in court. Jeff became my lead attorney, with Alex advising. The sight of Moore's expensive legal team trying to bulldoze a small-town lawyer representing a newly unemployed father fighting for his daughter didn't sit well with the judge. Kathy's own mother testified in my favor, offering to help me care for Lana, and her support sealed the case. When Kathy's threatening note was shown in court, Moore's lawyers looked visibly uncomfortable. The judge took Kathy's note at face value, ruling that she'd given up her claim to any marital assets. Our house and family business were in my mom's name, so the assets were limited to cars, IRAs, and bank accounts. More importantly, the judge agreed that Kathy's threat showed she didn't have Lana's best interests in mind. I was granted full custody of Lana, with Kathy allowed supervised visitation. Moore showed up on the last day of the trial, expecting victory, but left looking shocked and defeated. That night, we closed the restaurant to celebrate privately. I spent most of it comforting Kathy's mother, Nancy, who had supported me in court. A few weeks later, Kathy married Daniel Moore and moved to Los Angeles. Though she flew back to Oregon for weekly visits with Lana, things were difficult. Kathy and her mom often got into shouting matches during the visits, and after one especially bad argument, Nancy banned her from the house. We moved visits to the restaurant, where Kathy's mother would sit outside. keeping a close eye on her. My idea of returning to the restaurant full-time was premature. With my mom still running it and no plans to retire, I wasn't needed. Then, my former boss from Maple Grove, Marty, who was also fired, stopped by to discuss starting a new business with other ex-managers. I immediately agreed to join them. The idea behind our new business, Falcon, was to unite the suppliers that Maple Grove had dropped or lowballed and create a cooperative. We aimed to produce high-quality products and sell them to boutique natural food retailers who were rejecting Maple Grove's lower-quality goods. Our advantage was the good relationships we had built as the former management team at Maple Grove. Since we weren't operational yet, Marty would handle production when the time came. My role was to apply my MBA, drafting a business plan to secure funding and a marketing plan to convince suppliers we could sell what we produced. Then I got the call. "Roger!" Jeff shouted when I picked up. "What's going on?" I asked, worried by his tone. "Kathy tried to take Lana. Nancy tried to stop her, and now both are in the hospital. It's bad, Roger. You need to get here." I dropped everything and sped home, with Jeff filling me in. Kathy had tried to take Lana during her visit. When Nancy intervened, Kathy's driver pepper-sprayed her. Despite being in pain, Nancy chased after them. When Lana saw her grandma fall, she broke free and ran back, but she was struck by a truck. The driver wasn't at fault. He just couldn't stop in time. Nancy died in the ER, and Lana lingered in a coma for 8 days before passing. She would have turned 7 the next month. After that, I shut down emotionally. I vaguely remember the doctor telling us Lana was gone, then somehow finding myself in the restaurant kitchen days later cutting up a chicken without remembering how I got there. My family watched over me, making sure I didn't hurt myself. Arrangements were made for both funerals. I learned Nancy had named me her next of kin and left everything to Lana and me in her will. As her only son-in-law, and with no sons of her own, I was responsible for her final arrangements. I couldn't live in the house anymore. It was too painful. I moved into Jeff's apartment, and Gene moved into the house, as he needed to be close to the restaurant. Mom stayed with me most of the time, but returned to the house to sleep. Kathy and her driver were arrested at the scene. Witnesses told the police what had happened. The DA charged Kathy with first-degree custodial interference and the driver with second-degree hijacking. The driver was also charged with third-degree attack for pepper-spraying Nancy. Because these were felonies, they both faced 2 counts of felony liquidation for the end of lives of Nancy and Lana, with sentences of up to 25 years. At the arraignments, Jeff and Alex presented Kathy's prior threat to take Lana and the fact that she had left me for a wealthy, out-of-state man whose driver was involved. The judge deemed both Kathy and the driver flight risks and denied bail. The DA warned us they might not be convicted but expected a plea deal. Jeff asked if Moore's involvement could be proven, but the DA doubted it. They tried offering leniency in exchange for implicating Moore, but neither Kathy nor the driver cooperated. In the end, they pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree manslaughter and received concurrent sentences, eligible for parole after serving 6 years. I didn't submit a sufferer statement at their sentencing. While some feel satisfaction or closure after a sentencing, I felt nothing. The following months were a blur, with time flying when I was working and crawling when I wasn't. Nights were the hardest, and I buried myself in work to cope. One day, while working in the tea garden, I received a call from a woman named Sophie Soulis, asking to speak with me on behalf of Eamon Soulis, a billionaire shipping magnate. Eamon wanted to discuss a partnership, so I agreed to meet him. 3 days later, I checked into Timberline Lodge. There was a message waiting for me, inviting me to dinner at a nearby luxury condo. When I arrived, I was greeted by Eamon and Sophie, his daughter-in-law. After dinner, Eamon explained that he and Sophie had their own experience with Daniel Moore. Eamon believed Moore was responsible for his son Armand's liquidation. Armand Souli had risen from humble beginnings, amassing a fortune through illegal means before changing his ways to win the love of his wife, Manon. She inspired him to dedicate his wealth to good causes, founding the Manon Soulis Foundation to combat poverty and exploitation. After her end of life, their son Andre took over the foundation. The foundation became involved in negotiations in the impoverished state of San Lawrence, where a deal was being made to fund schools and hospitals in exchange for granting over 500,000 acres of rainforest to an energy and mining cartel. The foundation proposed an alternative plan, funding fewer schools, but protecting the land from deforestation and exploitation. The president of San Lawrence had welcomed Andre Soulis for a summit with local officials and tribal leaders. However, their plane disappeared over the rainforest, and shortly after, the vice president took over as president. The disappearance was blamed on eco-terrorists, and negotiations with the Solis Foundation ended abruptly. The deal with the mining cartel, funded by more equity partners, was quickly pushed through, leading to the destruction of the rainforest. "You saw that coming, didn't you?" Eamon said bitterly. He believed Moore's money had motivated the vice president, though he blamed the new president for his son's end of life. I recalled Jeff's words to our DA about Moore being behind my family's tragedy. Eamon admitted he wanted revenge but resisted because his late wife Manon and son wouldn't have approved. Sophie, his daughter-in-law, also firmly opposed any violent actions. Eamon shared a photo of his grandchildren, explaining that yielding to his darker instincts could cost him his relationship with them. When I asked why we were meeting, Eamon explained that Sophie had agreed he needed to act, but within legal and ethical bounds. Sophie then presented a folder detailing Moore's destructive business practices, including his acquisition of a bakery in Illinois. After initial growth, the company collapsed, leaving hundreds jobless, part of a pattern seen with other companies, including Maple Grove Mills. Eamon's proposal was clear. Someone needed to rescue these companies and prove that businesses could succeed with integrity. He suggested I take the lead, using my experience battling Moore in the divorce and custody case as a public face. Eamon and Sophie couldn't act directly, as it would look like rich people playing with businesses, but I could step in as someone with a personal stake. Skeptical, I asked if we could really succeed. Eamon pointed out that we were already trying to start a business based on integrity. He offered to provide the resources, ensuring the rescued companies wouldn't fail, unlike Moore's ventures. Sophie clarified that they wouldn't fake profits like Moore, but truly support the company's growth. Eamon promised that even if the venture ultimately failed, workers would benefit from restored jobs and a soft landing. I agreed to discuss the plan with my associates, ensuring complete transparency with them. The Falcon Group consisted of 4 members: Marty Ball, my former Maple Grove manager; Lucy Armstrong, Kathy's ex-manager in finance; Dennis McCoy, Maple Grove's former tech manager, and me. We hadn't yet decided on my role beyond drafting business and marketing plans. Jeff and Alex were involved for legal counsel, as they would handle our legal affairs if we officially became a business. We met at the restaurant, reviewing the proposal from Timberline while having dinner. Marty and Lucy were impressed, while Dennis agreed as he sampled a new dish. Lucy questioned the legality, and Alex explained that, as a privately owned company, the plan was legal, as long as no false claims were made to investors or lenders. Marty noted this clarified my role in Falcon as heading business development and marketing, though Jeff expressed concern. He pointed out that Eamon wanted me as the public face of the venture, which could put me in Moore's crosshairs if we succeeded in tarnishing his reputation. Jeff's worries were valid, but we moved forward regardless. We drafted a counter-proposal addressing these concerns, and our group, including Jeff and Alex, returned to meet with Eamon and Sophie to finalize the details. Falcon Associates was established as a New Mexico Anonymous LLC, where the owners' identities remained private. Jeff and Alex would represent us individually, while a separate attorney would serve as corporate counsel. Eamon and Sophie owned 50% of the company, and the 4 of us owned the other 50%, ensuring no single party had control. We agreed to make decisions as a unified block. Externally, we would appear as employees of Falcon, Marty as Director of Operations, Lucy as Director of Finance, Dennis as Director of Technology, and I as Managing Director. Whether I would also lead business development and marketing was undecided until we understood the resources available in the companies we aimed to rebuild. We set equal salaries of $250,000 per year, reasonable for a high-risk startup. We also arranged standard executive benefits and a 24/7 security hotline for our families. Lucy and Dennis opted to stay out of the public eye due to their families, and each of us had a $10 million life insurance policy for worst-case scenarios. A week after signing the agreements, Eamon informed us our salaries and benefits were in effect, and Falcon had $100 million in working capital with a $100 million reserve. Lucy was stunned when the financial statement arrived. It was a fraction of Eamon's wealth, but more than any of us had ever expected to manage. 3 weeks later, the Illinois baking company closed, leaving 316 workers unemployed. Soon after, Falcon Associates LLC successfully bid to acquire Pathway Bakeries, Inc. for $28 million, with plans to reopen the facility by mid-December. Falcon's managing director, Roger Richardson, stated their goal was to rebuild Pathway with a focus on people and quality, correcting the toxic culture under its previous owners. Falcon's acquisition was big news in Kelton, Illinois, a town hit hard by job losses since 2007. Former Pathway workers, like Rena and Andy Dean, felt betrayed by more equity partners, who had promised work before suddenly shutting down the plant. Now, just before Christmas, Falcon had acquired the plant and planned a public meeting to discuss its future. At the meeting, held at Kelton High School, the 600-seat auditorium was packed, with many attendees bringing their families. Former employees had each received an envelope, which they were instructed to open during the meeting. Inside were rehire letters offering them their jobs back, along with a $1,500 prepaid Visa card to help with holiday expenses. Roger Richardson, along with Marty Ball, explained that while the plant wouldn't be operational by Christmas due to neglected equipment, employees would return to work in stages starting in 2 weeks. Health insurance benefits had already been reinstated, and all salaries and seniorities would be preserved. The crowd responded with cheers, applause, and tears of relief. The night ended with a buffet in the school gym, where Falcon Associates officially welcomed back the Pathway workers and their families. I couldn't resist one more jab during interviews after the meeting, highlighting how the new Pathway would succeed on quality and integrity, everything the previous owners lacked. That evening, we shook hands with soon-to-be employees and their families who just weeks earlier had lost hope. Seeing the change in their eyes was uplifting. As we headed to the hotel, Marty asked, "Think any of this is getting back to more?" "No clue," I replied, "but it feels pretty good." Headline: Falcon gifts displaced Pathway workers, $1,500. December 12th, 2011, Kelton Record, Falcon Associates surprised former Pathway workers by giving them $1,500 Visa gift cards. Falcon, based in Albuquerque, plans to reopen the Kelton Bakery next week, initially hiring 70 workers, with hopes of rehiring all 300 by February. Mary Gladden, a former employee, was brought to tears by the unexpected generosity. "I didn't think I could give my kids much this Christmas. Now I can." Falcon's announcement made headlines nationwide. Videos from the meeting went viral, and news stories popped up with titles like "Pathway Rises from the Ashes" and "Miracle on Kelton Boulevard." One article even dubbed me the new George Bailey, while Daniel Moore was portrayed as Scrooge McMoore. Unsurprisingly, media attention turned to who we were. The press unearthed my divorce from Kathy, her marriage to Daniel Moore, and the tragic end of lives of Lana and Nancy. Although I declined to discuss my personal tragedy, we knew the story would eventually surface. It had all the elements of a soap opera. A wealthy millionaire fires a third of a town's workers, seduces a fired worker's wife, loses in court, and is ultimately linked to a tragic hijacking attempt that ends in 2 end-of-lives. Then the fired worker and his former colleagues start a new company and rescue another community left jobless by the same millionaire. You couldn't script it better. Some stories were tough to watch, especially one that revisited the site where Lana and Nancy were eliminated. I had to turn it off when the reporter filmed the small family altar inside the restaurant, where my mom burns incense in front of photos of my grandparents, Dad, Lana, and Nancy. Jeff denied involvement in the ambush interview that confronted Moore outside his LA condo, where a reporter asked if he felt responsible for Lana and Nancy's end-of-lives or Kathy's imprisonment. Moore's angry response, yelling something about failing and losers, was the hardest hit he'd taken yet. If Jeff did have a hand in it, I could live with that. The question of whether I would be just the face of the new Pathway or take on a hands-on role in business development, marketing, and sales was answered with a clear yes. Pathway's former non-Moore managers were eager to return, but they needed guidance to shift from restoring the old Pathway to building a new one that could address modern markets. Since I had been the one to present the $1,500 gift cards and make promises about rebuilding together, it naturally fell to me to rally the team and get them excited about the future. It took 4 months to get the Pathway plant fully operational due to years of neglect under Moore's management. We faced safety violations, deferred maintenance, and had to replace outdated equipment. We also upgraded the office tech, replacing all the computers and saving the hard drives for a secret data project. The rest was donated to local schools and nonprofits. We invested in our workforce as well. Employees who hadn't yet returned full-time received training, either to update their skills or prepare for new equipment, like robots. When asked if robots would lead to job cuts, Marty explained the goal was higher output with the same workforce, much like in the past, when output doubled without increasing headcount. Concerns about selling more Pathway products after the decline in quality were addressed by focusing on rebuilding trust with former customers. Our message, Pathway is back and better than ever, We also expanded into new markets like organics, sugar-free, gluten-free, and grain-free products, which had been ignored under Moore's management, but were now growing in demand. As it turned out, the U.S. gluten-free market grew by over 60% in the next 4 years. Our gluten-free product line, launched in summer 2012, accounted for nearly a third of our revenue, cementing my reputation within Pathway's marketing team. Meanwhile, Maple Grove Mills, having let go of the marketing analysts we hired as consultants, completely missed the gluten-free boom. The first year of New Pathway felt like my time working on the Falcon Cooperative, but on a much larger scale. Instead of driving around Oregon and Washington building relationships, I was flying across the U.S., working on new and renewed partnerships for Pathway. Many of these renewals were with businesses the old Pathway had alienated due to poor quality, late shipments, and billing issues. Even though we rehired Pathway's marketing and sales teams, many clients insisted on hearing directly from me, the new managing director, that the problems under Moore's ownership were gone. I never missed the chance to emphasize that we were a new company, completely separate from Moore's Pathway. The PR efforts paid off. Sales began to rise, and we signed contracts to produce store-branded products. While this might seem like competition for our own products, the store brands didn't cost us anything for distribution or advertising, so the profit margins were nearly the same. Our business plan was working. We held 2 meetings each quarter. The Pathway meeting included the entire company, where senior management met in the boardroom, and everyone else could log in online. Though not required as a private company, we valued transparency. The Falcon meeting was private, just the 4 of us, Eamon, Sophie, and our legal team. Eamon, as the majority shareholder, could have led these meetings, but he and Sophie preferred to remain silent partners, so we rotated the responsibility. At our 3rd meeting, marking 1 year since Falcon Associates was formed, Lucy chaired the session. After reviewing the usual updates, sales, plant performance, morale, and tech projects, Lucy revealed the financials. Pathway would end Q4 in the black, a year ahead of projections. This surprise came from an unplanned contract with Champion Markets. I had met their CEO at a trade show and pitched our private label services. When Champion expanded into the Southwest, their existing supplier became overwhelmed, so we took over their hard-baked snack line. It was a win-win with no job losses, and the deal looked promising for long-term success. The New Pathway's first holiday party was on December 21st, 2012, our last workday of the year. The company provided the main dishes, and employees brought potluck items. Families and kids were invited, with someone dressed as Santa, not me. We screened It's a Wonderful Life in the conference room, and I jokingly told the kids that Mr. Potter's first name was Daniel. Never miss an opportunity. After a gift exchange, under $20, gag gifts encouraged, we held a prize drawing and packed up leftovers for people to take home. Before everyone left, I announced, "We appreciate all your hard work this year, and when you receive your final checks, there will be a little extra." Applause followed. "It's not a Christmas bonus," I added. "It's profit sharing." Headline: Falcon shares profits with Pathway workers. December 24th, 2012, Kelton Record. A cheer erupted at Pathway's holiday party when Falcon Associates Managing Director, Roger Richardson, announced a profit-sharing bonus. Each employee received $500. Pathway employs 325 full-time workers. "As a private company, we don't disclose earnings," Richardson said, "but this year's profits are being shared equally among all employees to show our appreciation for their hard work. We are building a new Pathway from the ruins of its predecessor." Never miss an opportunity. The next shot in our battle with Daniel Moore came unexpectedly. After Maple Grove Mills laid off 150 workers, businesses in Rose Valley felt the impact, especially restaurants. I used some of my Falcon salary to help cover bills at Richardson's Garden, and my mom and cousin Jean had health insurance through Falcon. In January, Jeff told me about a strange pattern at the restaurant. Fired Maple Grove employees were coming in more often and buying takeout for their friends still working at the mill. Mom learned that Richardson's Garden had been removed from Maple Grove's list of approved caterers, with management implying there would be repercussions for employees who continued to patronize the restaurant. Rumor had it that this decision came after Daniel Moore threw a tantrum, shouting he would ruin those chinks. I shared this with Eamon and Sophie, and Eamon called a teleconference. "I think we're getting to him," I said. Jeff agreed. Eamon raised a concern about security. We decided to bring in Gray Bear Security, who specialized in blending into their surroundings while providing protection. We hired a new waiter for Richardson's Garden, a retired Navy chief named Duke, pronounced Duque. who also drove for Mom and moved into a spare room at her house to assist her if needed. According to Mom, Duke was an excellent waiter and driver. Eamon made some calls, and a TV chef who featured small-town eateries came to Rose Valley. He visited local spots, including a breakfast house, brewery, and an artisan baker who praised his stone-ground flour from a historic grist mill. The crew deliberately showed the chef driving past Maple Grove Mills without stopping, but they highlighted Richardson's garden. Mom and Jean impressed the chef with special dishes from their secret Chinese menu, turning the restaurant into a minor gourmet destination. The extra business more than made up for the loss caused by Moore's attempted embargo. Word got back that Moore was furious that Richardson's garden wasn't struggling but had actually expanded its staff. Jeff and Alex hired a new paralegal, a former deputy sheriff who lost her job when a county bond failed. She rented a room from Alex and his wife and carpooled with them. Meanwhile, Marty, Lucy, and Dennis opted against full-time security but added someone to the Pathway security team. They also hired a nanny to shuttle their kids between school and home, helping them manage their busy work-from-home schedules. I hired an executive assistant, Rebecca Sullivan, a former Navy NCO who had handled maltreatment from a superior officer by putting him in the hospital. Her story of taking him down impressed both Marty and me. Marty said, "She's perfect for you," comparing her attitude toward power misusers to mine when talking about Moore. Rebecca was highly competent as an assistant, and while I wasn't eager to test her bodyguard skills, her presence was reassuring. Rebecca and Dave Simpson, the new security guard at the executive office, moved into condos in the same complex where Marty and I lived. They integrated into our work and lives seamlessly, with Rebecca and I carpooling to work, supposedly to save gas. Rebecca's arrival also resolved a staffing issue. Maureen, who had been supporting both Marty and me, was reallocated solely to Marty, who was now Pathway's general manager after its previous manager, Harry, retired due to health issues. This left Rebecca to fully assist me with my cross-country duties as managing director of Falcon and Pathway. When I asked Rebecca how much she knew about our operations, she surprised me by revealing that Gray Bear Security, her employer, was a subsidiary of Global Maritime Protection Services, owned by the Sully's Shipping Group. I should have expected that connection. The rest of Q1 2013 was steady, with monthly financial improvements. If we maintained this pace, we'd be a $10 million company by year-end, though we were mostly restoring Pathway to where it had been before Moore's mismanagement. Despite this progress, our only notable victory against Moore was his failed embargo on Richardson's garden. We knew we needed to escalate things to the next level. An opportunity soon presented itself. Westover Foods, Inc., Phil Barnes explained at our Q1 Falcon meeting, makes Marvel bread and Happy Snack cakes. Management has drained it financially while promising to maintain the pension fund. This month, they reneged on the pension, violating the union contract. If the union refuses contract changes, the company will go under. But they'll keep the pension. If they accept, the company fails anyway, and they lose everything. Bankruptcy seems inevitable, Lucy said. Phil confirmed the union had voted down the new contract. 2 bids are in, $680 million for Happy, likely a done deal. More Equity Partners is the sole bidder for Marvel at $30 million. They won't like that, Dennis noted. They don't, Phil agreed, which is why they approached us. They like what we're doing with Pathway. If we take over Marvel, they'll make compensation concessions to keep the pension fund intact. Bidding against Moore takes things up a notch, I said. Do we know what it would take to outbid him? Iman asked, Phil replied. Moore's bid was a take it or leave it offer. He's publicly claimed Marvel is a loser, and he's the only one who can fix it. So just bidding makes him look bad, I reasoned, and forces him to reconsider his offer. But could we save another company? Falcon Associates buys Marvel bread from Westover Foods, April 9, 2013. Food business news. Falcon Associates has purchased Marvel Bread Company assets for $43.85 million. The acquisition includes 4 brands, 5 baking plants, and 11 depots, expanding Pathway's distribution into the Pacific Northwest and Midwest. A week later, we flew to Portland for Marvel's first all-employee meeting. Gray Bear Security handled our travel, and we were greeted by security at the airport. The meetings were more straightforward than Pathway's debut, as the unions had initiated our involvement. Marvel's workers wanted to meet us face-to-face to hear our plans. Half of Marvel's 430 employees attended in person, while the rest joined via video conference. We discussed our success with Pathway and assured them that Marvel products would be distributed alongside Pathway's. The The turning point came when I mentioned growing up in Oregon eating Marvel's Pioneer Trail honey butter bread. I vowed to make sure it didn't disappear, which seemed to reassure them. Afterward, we toured the Portland, Anchorage, Spokane, and Billings plants. Marty returned to Kelton, while the rest of us flew back to Portland, where we were picked up for the drive to Rose Valley. Lucy and Dennis worked remotely from Rose Valley, traveling to Illinois as needed. Meanwhile, my extended absences made me realize that spending time in Rose Valley was difficult. Every visit pulled me back into painful memories of the past. I hoped that bringing work and Rebecca along would help me focus on the present. Rebecca, my executive assistant, insisted on staying in my apartment's second bedroom over the restaurant. Mom didn't seem to mind. She might have even thought having someone new around was a good thing after Kathy. One night, I woke up to find Rebecca next to me. She explained that I had been shouting in my sleep, calling out for Lana and Kathy, and she had stayed to comfort me. She thought I might have PTSD and urged me to talk to someone. Later, as we reviewed notes from the Marvel meetings, Rebecca asked how I managed to inspire hope in others while struggling with my own pain. I had no answer. The rest of my visit to Rose Valley felt uncomfortable, haunted by bad memories at every turn. By the time I left, it was clear that Rose Valley was no longer my home. Rebecca was right. I needed help. When you're the managing director of a company in the spotlight and featured on Fortune, seeking help for potential PTSD isn't as simple as calling your insurance's provider list. Even though Falcon's success was a team effort, I was the public face, and any perception of instability could damage our business and damage our fight against Daniel Moore. Naturally, Eamon had a connection. After some calls, I saw a doctor in Chicago. The diagnosis confirmed Rebecca's suspicion. I had PTSD, mainly from unresolved grief over my daughter and anger at my ex-wife, with my worst episodes triggered by visits to Rose Valley. But my PTSD wasn't the only issue. I was also dealing with chronic stress from work, responsibility for hundreds of jobs, and the constant presence of bodyguards. On top of that, I showed signs of depression. I left the doctor with medication and a stress management plan, returning for bi-weekly therapy. We didn't have to save another company to meet Sophie's condition about avoiding damage to innocence. We just had to save jobs. Marvel turned out to be easier to rebuild than Pathway, as Westover's equity group had ignored it while gutting Happy Brands. Marvel's regional bread brands were growing, especially in the Pacific Northwest. The depots we acquired helped expand Pathway's distribution, which was already riding high from the nationwide attention we got after acquiring Pathway and giving out Christmas bonuses. The grassroots support boosted demand, and we had to add shifts to meet orders for the holidays, making it the biggest Christmas in Pathway's history. The concessions Marvel's union made allowed us to equalize pay across all Falcon divisions, and once that was done, the union concessions were lifted. The unions representing Marvel, Westover, and Pathway employees eventually merged and negotiated as one, making it easier for us to handle contracts nationwide. Marvel bread, combined with therapy, was good for me. By the end of December, my blood pressure had dropped 20%, and I had learned to redirect my dreams to happier memories of my daughter. We all celebrated a happy new year in 2014. Well, maybe not everyone. Our first quarterly meeting of 2014 went smoothly. Sales were up, plants were performing well, and employee morale was strong. Then, we got the results from our secret data project. When Falcon acquired Pathway, we inherited not just its physical assets, but its intellectual property, including old data. Dennis's team had been working for years to recover deleted data from the servers and backups, some of which Moore's people had carelessly left behind when they wiped the hard drives. It turns out Moore had used Pathway's finances to commit fraud, shifting money around to make the company look profitable. We found emails, account numbers for offshore accounts, and records linking him to schemes at other companies like Wilson Energy and Paulson Mining. Even more shocking, Dennis uncovered records showing that Moore orchestrated the financial distress of Rose Valley homeowners to force a buyout of Maple Grove Mills. His group had issued toxic mortgages to residents, pushing more than 60% of the town's homeowners underwater, effectively ruining the lives of many in order to seize control of the company. We handed all the data over to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the FTC, the SEC, the IRS, and other agencies. On April 12, 2014, charges were brought against Daniel Moore and Moore Equity Partners for fraud, tax evasion, and running a $3.2 billion scam. Moore had falsified revenues to secure loans and used fraudulent money to pay off earlier lenders. The IRS uncovered offshore accounts and layers of companies used to hide the stolen money. The SEC sought the return of Moore's ill-gotten gains while the DOJ froze his assets. A court hearing was scheduled for December, and the IRS requested the asset freeze continue. The trials lasted over a year, during which Moore repeatedly claimed the evidence against him was faked. Dennis and Lucy testified about recovering Pathways data, and Moore's defense couldn't explain how fake data included real offshore bank accounts in places like the Bahamas and Luxembourg, holding over $1 billion that were never reported to the IRS. On June 24, 2015, Moore was sentenced to 60 years in prison for fraud and tax evasion. He had founded Moore Equity Partners in 1985, which owned 5 companies at its peak. Moore was convicted of falsifying revenues to secure loans, using fraudulently obtained money to pay off earlier debts, and hiding the proceeds to evade taxes. He was ordered to pay $3.2 billion in restitution. In addition to Moore, 7 partners and over a dozen employees were also indicted. They either pled guilty or were convicted after testifying against Moore. However, we were disappointed when the DOJ classified Moore's Carnivore mortgage scheme in Rose Valley as a civil violation with no criminal charges. The government seized $2.8 billion in assets, including offshore accounts, properties, and personal items. Falcon Associates received a whistleblower award from the IRS for 30% of the recovered amount. At an estimated $960 million, it would be the largest award in history once the assets were fully liquidated. Our plan to take down Daniel Moore by reviving the businesses he ruined would result in nearly $600 million in profit. My ex-wife, who had worked in Maple Grove Mill's finance department under Moore, was not charged. She kept $500,000, a $1.6 million LA condo, and some cars. Until her release from prison, her assets were managed by a court-appointed guardian. Eamon Sulis passed away peacefully on October 2, 2015 at age 91. Though no evidence linked Moore to the end of life of Eamon's son, Andre, we hope that seeing Moore imprisoned brought Eamon some closure. His memorial was a private affair, with only his daughter-in-law Sophie, his grandchildren, and close friends. We didn't attend, as he had wanted to keep his connection to Falcon Associates secret to protect us all. Media reports stated that Eamon left millions to charity, with his shipping empire going to his daughter-in-law and grandchildren. Several weeks after his will was read, we met Sophie at the Timberline condominium. Eamon bequeathed his share in Falcon Associates to me, Sophie said, ensuring we remained business partners. She handed us a financial statement revealing that Falcon's value had reached $1 billion, making each of our shares worth over $200 million. Eamon's final investment, Sophie confirmed. He told me that Falcon was the project he was most proud of, even though no one outside this room would ever know he funded it. Sophie also gave us a letter from Eamon. In it, he expressed gratitude for our friendship and for helping him find redemption. He ended the letter with a simple request: save as many of them as you can. Sophie smiled as I finished reading. So, she asked, who are we saving next? A few months later, Falcon Associates finalized the purchase of Moore Equity Partners assets on December 4, 2015, acquiring Wilson Energy, Paulson Mining, and Maple Grove Mills for about $528 million. Moore's operations at Wilson and Paulson were built on environmental destruction and displacing indigenous communities, I said, as Falcon's managing director. We will end these practices immediately and work to reverse the damage. Maple Grove Mills will also be restored to its former reputation for quality. Falcon Associates will uphold the highest standards of business integrity. We discovered that Wilson and Paulson were mostly holding companies used by Moore to defraud investors. Thankfully, their promises of mass rainforest destruction were just another fraud. When we canceled the San Lorenz rainforest deal and cut ties with the thugs hired to intimidate indigenous tribes, we found only about 200 actual employees between both companies. While we weren't eager to save jobs designed for destruction, we offered them a chance to work on Falcon Environmental Group's new South American restoration project. This project was a huge risk, as no one had successfully replanted such a large section of deforested rainforest. However, it attracted top environmental scientists, and if we succeeded, it could create numerous jobs in environmental restoration. That brings us to today. I'm sitting in a warehouse at Maple Grove Mills, the only place large enough to hold all current and former employees and their families. We've set up a stage, and around 70% of Rose Valley's population is here, waiting to hear from us. We'll start with our Falcon message: success through quality and integrity. We'll remind them that Maple Grove was once a place of respect, fairness, and high standards, and that we can make it that way again. Rebuilding Maple Grove won't be like saving Pathway, Marvel, or even Wilson and Paulson. Those companies' workers were united, but here, a third of Maple Grove's staff were pushed out 4 years ago, not just for a short time. We hired many of them as Falcon consultants and helped others find jobs at Marvel, and while we'll offer them positions at Maple Grove again, not everyone may want to return. Those who do might still feel resentment toward their neighbors and coworkers, even family, who cashed in and sold out the heart of our town. I get it. I'm one of them. Just as I faced my own demons, we all need to confront what happened here. If we don't, it'll eat away at us. I'm going to speak openly about what we let happen, the cost, and how we must work together to rebuild our community. Yes, I said our hometown. As Falcon's public face, I've become a symbol of the pain this town has endured. To make any difference, I have to come back and help make Rose Valley home again. Because if we can't do that, the person who tore it apart still wins. If you're wondering if my story has a happy ending, you're not alone. Sure, I went from being jobless to becoming a partner in a billion-dollar business. My ex-wife is serving her sentence, and the villain is a broke convict likely spending life in prison. Over 1,000 workers across several states see me as their savior. But I'd trade all of it to hold my daughter again. There's a part of me that success and justice can't heal. As for love, it's going to take a long time, if ever, before I go down that road again. Still, life goes on, and I have plenty to keep me occupied. So maybe there isn't a clear ending. I can't say I'm happy, but I have a purpose. And for now, that's enough. Maybe there's hope after all.
Do you believe any company would hire a child from a poor single mother? My goal was to work at the same bank where my father worked, and during the final interview, someone known as the demon instructor said that to me. It was clear this person looked down on me for being from a single mother household and had no intention of accepting me for the position. I desperately dealt with it, but the interview kept getting worse and worse. Finally reaching my limit, I took my goal out of my phone from my back and called my father. That's because my father is actually the bank's president. My name is Jessica Chastain. I'm a 23-year-old college senior looking for a job. My parents got divorced last year, so my mom is now a single mother. They both wanted to live their own lives, naturally. I stayed with my mom, but my future plans were influenced by my father. My father is the president of the bank, the chief executive officer. This bank is the largest in the country, and I aspired to be a bank employee because I admired my father for working there. And tomorrow, I have my final interview. Honestly, I'm not very good at studying. And when I said my goal was to work at the bank, my teachers and peers not only tried to stop me but also ridiculed me. I thought it would all end after the interview, but looking back, it was really awful. One day, during my college life, "Hey Jessica, have you decided where you're going to go after graduation?" Her name was Nancy. She's a friend I met in college. For me, it's just the one choice, the bank. I answered her question without hesitation. Then the people around us who had been listening to our conversation started to murmur. Did I say something strange? Just as I thought that, Nancy spoke up first. You know, Jessica, it's hard to say, but I think you should know your place. Huh? To my surprise, someone I thought was my friend was insulting me. As I tried to argue back in frustration, another guy approached me and said it's impossible for you. That place is the largest bank in the country, you know? It's the most difficult to get into from this university, with only one person getting a job from there in the past 10 years. I know that. Of course, I haven't told anyone around me that my father is the head of the bank I'm applying to. If I did, people would likely say I got through the back door considering my abilities. If that happened, I'd be causing trouble for my father, and it would be painful to feel like my skills aren't good enough. I didn't like being talked about, especially when it wasn't true. Jessica, I'm saying this for your own good. While I don't need your advice, as I looked around, everyone's eyes were on me, their cold stares pierced my heart. Why do I have to hear this? As I thought that, the teacher who had noticed the commotion came over. What's going on here? The boy from earlier answered, Chastain says she wants to work at North Trust Bank. At that, the teacher's face also tensed up, and then she said something unthinkable. Are you taking society for granted? Even the teacher, who was supposed to be on the student's side, denied my dream. There was no one there to stand up for me. Well, if I want to go there, what's wrong with that? Of course, I objected. But the teacher piled on more. You're naive. My father is an interviewer for North Trust Bank. They say he's a demon interviewer. The teacher's surname was Thomas, a 29-year-old woman, so if I encountered an interviewer with the same surname Thomas, it would likely be her father, a demon interviewer. You say? Yes, that's right. My father doesn't like new talent. He says it's good enough if he interviews 100 people and hires 2. That's what it was at the Sun Plaza branch. And you're from a single-mother household, right? I wondered why she would ask that, but I honestly answered yes. Then the teacher showed his sinister smile. At that time, I had no way of knowing the reason for her smile. The argument ended with the bell signaling the start of class. But from that moment on, the way people looked at me grew colder. My friends, starting with Nancy whom I thought was my friend, and my classmates who attended classes with me, distanced themselves. For me, it was as if they didn't want to associate with a fool. Their reactions became worse with each exam I passed. The North Trust Bank exam process had 4 stages. The first stage was a written test, the second and third stages were interviews by people from the head office. In the fourth and final stage, interviews were conducted by the person in charge of hiring for the desired work area and the head office hiring manager. In other words, it was an interview with the highest-ranking hiring manager. By the way, I wanted to work at the bank at the Sun Plaza, and I had managed to pass the third stage. Why, how did you pass the third stage? Even those who had looked down on me were now surprised and anxious about my progress. That's because most of them had failed their desired company's second stage interviews. It had been 3 months since the job hunting season began. In my class alone, there were no confirmed hires. The atmosphere was filled with panic, envy, and jealousy. Perhaps I could be the first one to get a job offer. Those who had been so arrogant now ostracized me even more due to their pride. However, I got used to that life at university and decided to focus only on myself. My motivation was solely to get an offer from North Trust Bank, my mind was only on that. But then one day, Teacher Thomas started attacking me in front of everyone after class. All right, everyone, listen up, the teacher shouted to everyone who was preparing to leave. At her voice, everyone turned around and stopped what they were doing. I also paid attention, wondering what was going on. And then the teacher started talking. This time, Jessica Chastain has cleared the 3rd round of North Trust Bank's exams. The atmosphere around us suddenly became heavy. However, with the next statement, everyone around me seemed to catch their breath. But it seems she'll fail the 4th round, huh? What do you mean? I muttered involuntarily. Seeing my reaction, the teacher twisted her face into a sneer. The reason is the interviewer for the 4th round has been decided to be my father, the demon instructor Thomas. Oh, the surroundings erupted in surprise and cheers. Serves you right. Know your place. Good. The classroom was filled with voices condemning me in unison. I couldn't believe it. Everyone I thought were my friends turned their back on me during this job hunting process, even though I had done nothing wrong. Despite that, those around me harassed me and hurled abusive language at me. At first, I thought it might be a way to relieve stress. The stress from job hunting is immeasurable, so I wanted to think that they were just harassing me to relieve that stress. But it was different. I realized the situation around me. This was jealousy. They were envious of me challenging something they themselves wouldn't dare to. There's no way I could lose to someone like her who isn't even good at studying. There is no way someone like her could get into North Trust Bank. If she can make it, then so can I. If Chastain is going, I should have tried as well. But that place is difficult, it's the most challenging, it's impossible. So why is Chastain trying without hesitation? It's wrong. She's trying for a place that even I can't get into. I can't forgive that. It's strange, the reality that becomes apparent as job hunting progresses. Among those who pass, those who fail, and various others, no one here has much hope. I was being attacked because of jealousy. The final straw was the teacher's words and actions, as her father was in charge of hiring at North Trust Bank. If the teacher led the attack on me, the students overflowing with jealousy would just follow her. On that day, I finally couldn't take it anymore and stormed out of the room. When I returned home, my mother encouraged me gently. Wrapped in such warmth, I cried. I took a break from university for a while, and before I knew it, the day of the final interview had come. Don't forget, just do your best. I left the house after receiving words of encouragement from my mother. Upon arriving at the interview venue, I was guided to the waiting room. At first, there were nearly 300 applicants in the Sun Plaza area, but now only about 10 remained. Only 3 would survive from this group. My name was called just as I was about to close my eyes to concentrate. Please come in. Hello, thank you. My final interview began. There were 3 people in the room. One was Thomas, the teacher's father, just as the teacher had said. The second was a man who appeared to be the chief hiring officer. He looked about 10 years younger than my father, a man in his 30s, presumably in charge of keeping records, faced a computer at a slight distance. The interview began with questions from Thomas, starting with the typical self-introduction. I was asked about my motivation for applying. I answered these questions without difficulty. I don't really like female bank employees, the complaints started suddenly. Not knowing what to say in response, I fell silent. Thomas continued, because they have quiet voices, are physically weak, and many think they can please people just by serving tea. I realized this man must be the type to mistreat his subordinates, and this would be a stressful interview from here on. Silence is taboo in an interview, so I racked my brain and tackled the situation. I was in a sports club, and I think I'm strong. I'll do my best with any job given to me, just like a man. I tried to appeal and respond flexibly to his complaints. However, he didn't find it amusing and clicked his tongue, directing his gaze toward the papers in his hand. I felt something was off at this point. This interview was clearly going too far, yet the chief hiring officer, who should be higher ranking than Thomas, said nothing. Upon closer observation, the chief hiring officer looked younger than Thomas. Maybe Thomas is pressuring this person too, that's what I thought. However, there was nothing I could do about it. I could only sit quietly and endure the interview. After a brief silence, Thomas spoke again. It seemed he would be in charge of the entire interview. You seem to come from a single-mother household, am I wrong? He was probably looking at the documents I submitted from university. They included my address and family composition. Yes, my parents divorced, and now I live with my mother. As soon as he heard my words, Thomas began to laugh, his sinister smile echoing through the room. I see you're from a single-mother household. What business does a poor person have here? As soon as he heard my response, he blatantly changed his attitude. As the teacher's sinister smile crossed my mind, I became sweaty. I struggled to find the correct response and began to feel anxious. But it was Thomas who started talking first. Do you think there's a company that would hire someone from a poor single-parent family like you? He said that while mocking me. Just because I'm from a single-parent family, I won't be hired? You're going to assume I'm poor. I couldn't help but raise my tone. Of course, Thomas reacted to that. It was as if he had been waiting for me to fight back. Should I take your attitude as defiance toward me, your interviewer? I was frustrated, but I couldn't say anything back. The bank my father worked at, which I had always admired, I don't want to lose because of this one man. But I don't know what to say in return. Why don't you say something? Thomas further pressured me. The moment I heard those words, something inside me snapped. My consciousness fell swiftly. I became incredibly calm, to the point where I couldn't believe it myself. Understood, Thomas seemed puzzled by my response. While staring at him, I stood up from the hard metal chair. Hey, what's with you suddenly standing up? Finally, another person spoke, having been sitting the whole time. You've finally gone mad, huh? What do you plan to do? I know about you because I've heard from my daughter. It seems that the teacher and Thomas had shared information. Is this not a leak of information? Well, that doesn't matter now. I took my phone out of my bag and suddenly started making a call. What are you doing? Making a phone call? Are you making a mockery of this interview? Stop it now, or I'll reject you right here, Thomas threatened me. But I wasn't fazed at all. Then I spoke into the phone. Hello, Dan. Your father. What can a person from a single-parent family do? Clinging to their separated father, was that the laugh from the hiring manager? Yes, that's right. A guy named Thomas. Hey, Dad, can you come to the interview room now? Of course, I just finished visiting a nearby branch, so I'll be there in 10 minutes. Wait for me there, okay? And so I hung up the phone. The person in charge of the recording was staring at me with wide eyes, surprised by the unusual scene. And of course, the one who reacted the most was Thomas. Pointing at me, he said, "You're finished." Making a phone call during an interview, unprecedented. There's no way you'll pass. Go home and go to bed or something. I finally decided to argue back against him. I couldn't take it anymore. This isn't even an interview. It's you who's finished, Mr. Thomas. The chief hiring officer and the recorder were astonished by my sudden confrontation with the interviewer. Judging by their expressions, no one had been able to stand up to this man's abusive behavior until now. As evidence, the recorder's eyes were shining. Were they expecting Thomas to be punished? Thomas slammed his right hand on the table with all his might. A loud thud echoed throughout the room. The men were surprised, but I didn't flinch. And then I spoke to Thomas. Luke Damant, you know him, right? For a moment, Thomas had a look on his face as if I had hit a nerve with my question. He immediately countered, "Are you mocking me? There's no way anyone wouldn't know the president of this bank." To Thomas, who was confidently showing off his composure, I added some more words. So if my last name was Damant until recently, would you think it's a coincidence? Time seemed to stop for the three of them. The chief hiring officer and the recorder stared at me with wide eyes. Thomas then stood up from his chair and muttered, "What did you say?" His face showed a somewhat uneasy expression. Jessica Damant. That was my full name until recently. My father is Luke Damant, yes, the president of the bank, 63-year-old Luke Damant. What? You've got to be kidding. This can't be happening. Thomas let out a strange scream. This was no longer an interview. But at that moment, my father entered the room. As the door opened, he then said words that echoed my own feelings. "This is hardly an interview at all, Mr. Damant. Thank you for your hard work." The two men stood up and greeted my father as soon as they saw him enter. I looked at my father and felt that his presence was extraordinary. The president, Thomas's face turned pale as he muttered. His mouth remained open. My father then spoke to him, "Hey, Thomas, what were you doing to my daughter, huh?" My father was a big man who had practiced judo, and now with his shaved head and a scar on his forehead, he looked intimidating. His deep resonant voice was one that everyone found frightening. Even the confident Thomas, the moment he heard my father's voice, "Yes, sir," squeaked out. "I don't want to hear your answer," and then, Green, it seemed that Green was the chief hiring officer. This was my first time learning his name because the nameplate was bent, and I couldn't see it. Yes, sir. Aren't you the chief hiring officer? Have you let this tyrant run wild until now? I'm very sorry, the man called Green bent at a 90-degree angle and bowed. The young clerk looked scared at the sight. Even he, who had done nothing wrong, was drenched in sweat. Hey, clerk, what's your name? My father suddenly called out in a gentle voice. The change in his voice only made it more terrifying. My name is Finn. Mr. Finn, can you send today's interview record to my PC? Of course. You're also recording the audio, right? I later heard that this bank's interviews were not only transcribed but also recorded as backup. Thanks to that, Thomas's misconduct was exposed to my father, and he was punished. Looking at Thomas, he was trembling. He was like a frog stared down by a snake. Hey, Thomas. Yes? What is it? The frightened Thomas couldn't even speak clearly. He was a completely different person from earlier. Apologize to my daughter. It's not because she's my daughter, okay? You've trampled on the feelings of young people who want to join this bank. At my father's words, Thomas bowed deeply and apologized. Sorry, but I couldn't forgive him even after seeing that. Dad, I can't forgive him, when I murmured that, weakly. Of course, my father said, walking up to Thomas. It looked like a lion about to hunt a small animal. Thomas, do you know what will happen to you if you do something like this? My father pressured him. Thomas was frozen. You didn't just do this to my daughter, right? We'll see later in the records. But how many victims have you had besides her? No one could intervene in this interrogation-like scene. Even I, his daughter, could barely watch in silence, feeling disgusted. Thomas began to speak to my father, sweat pouring down his face. At least over 100 people, I was shocked to hear that he had done the same thing to more than 100 people. Furthermore, the fact that he was left unchecked made me doubt the hiring practices of this company. I felt distrustful, even though it was my father's company. Hey, Green, my father said, yes, I'm busy with overseas projects, so I trusted you and left the hiring to you. Well, this is my mistake in choosing people. It's my fault that it ended up like this. So, I'll take responsibility and reform personnel so there won't be any more victims like this. You two should be prepared for punishment, okay? And Thomas, I'll never forgive you, he gasped, frightened. I plan to gather all the victims and create a victims group. I'll bravely make it public in the media. I'm prepared to face any consequences, so you should be prepared too, right? Hearing this, Thomas collapsed on the spot, as if he had lost his sanity. My father moved away from him and opened a window. Oxygen returned to the tense room. Everyone had seemingly forgotten to breathe, and so, my job interview ended. By the way, I passed. It wasn't due to my father's favoritism. It was apparently the result of a discussion among hiring managers from all areas, based on the recorded audio. As a result, the hiring decisions of those who were rejected by Thomas were also reconsidered. The news broke the next day, and my father bowed in front of the media. Many people were impressed by his attitude, and he continued as the bank president. On the other hand, Green, who had been the chief hiring officer, voluntarily resigned, and Thomas was sued by the company and the victims group. Thomas, whose past tyranny was gradually exposed, was arrested for defamation. Meanwhile, at the university, oh, Miss Chastain, congratulations on your job offer, the teacher with a forced smile congratulated me in front of everyone. At that moment, my father and the principal appeared in the classroom. And then, Miss Thomas, this is Luke Damant, the president of North Trust Bank. Oh, yes, I've seen him on TV, so I know who he is. And he is Jessica Chastain's father. What? What did you say? I added to the surprised teacher's words. He's my mother's ex-husband and my father. My words caused a stir in the class. Is that so? Humans have a tendency to flatter those with power. When they realized I was the daughter of the bank's top executive, everyone in the classroom became agitated. It was as if they had wished they had been friendlier to me. Miss Chastain's father is the president of North Trust Bank, the teacher said upon learning the truth, becoming an empty shell. The principal then said to the teacher, "This school is able to operate thanks to the support of Mr. Demant's bank. But it seems you've been bad-mouthing Mr. Demant's daughter along with the rest of the class, haven't you?" "Well, that is never mind the excuses, tell me only the truth." Pressed by the dean, the teacher finally hung her head and admitted, "Yes, Mr. Demant wants to discontinue support for this school. If those who harassed Miss Chastain voluntarily leave the school, he says the support will continue." "What? Leave the school? If you decide to stay, we intend to charge you the entire amount of the discontinued support. Naturally, I don't think you can afford it. So, what will you do?" The choice was clear to me as I listened. The teachers seemed to understand as well and ultimately resigned from the school, effective immediately. As they left, they apologized to me, but their voices were so quiet that I couldn't make it out. In the end, more than half of the classmates who had attacked me together withdrew voluntarily from the school. When my father said those who don't come forward before my daughter names the culprits will be considered for legal action, one by one they confessed. Given the power on display, it was a natural outcome. Ultimately, those people escaped legal action, but their enrollment in the university was not recognized. With my father's help, I secured a job offer, and my path after graduation was set. All that's left is to do my best for the remainder of my college life. My life is just beginning. I vowed in my heart to do my best to someday become an exemplary banker like my father.